What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in MHA as THUNDERGOD Denki, Superstar Superhero, Part 2. If you enjoy this type of content, please gently eradicate the like button. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Remember to check out the original story linked in the description. Without further ado, let's get into the legend of the Thunder God. In the conference room of UA High School, the hero course teachers gathered to discuss an unexpected topic just 2 days before the entrance exam. While preparations for the upcoming exams were nearly complete, today's meeting had been called specifically to address one candidate in particular. A few days ago, midnight, one of the faculty members had formally proposed that Kaminari Denki be considered for admission as a recommended student. The assessment for recommended students was scheduled for tomorrow, a day before the regular entrance exam. The evaluation for these students was more of a formality, meant to ensure that their actual abilities matched the information on file. "Let's begin," said the principal, seated at the head of the table. His voice was calm, and his expression as gentle as ever. Despite looking like a large, fluffy white mouse, no one in the room found his appearance unusual. In this world of quirks, where superhuman abilities and bizarre mutations were the norm, the principal's appearance was hardly out of place. "The information about Kaminari Denki is in front of you," the principal continued. "Please take a moment to familiarize yourselves with it." "Whoa! Present Mike," the energetic voice hero exclaimed after a quick glance at the file. From elementary school all the way through middle school, he scored perfect marks in every subject, including physical education. "We've got a real prodigy here. His quirk is electricity-based, huh?" Aizawa, the long-haired and perpetually tired-looking teacher, noted with a nonchalant tone as he skimmed Kaminari's profile. "Lightning-type quirks are notoriously hard to control. That's why you rarely see many top-tier heroes with those abilities." "True," added Recovery Girl, an elderly woman in a white lab coat. "Most people with electricity-related quirks end up in support roles, especially in fields like equipment development. Their quirks lend themselves well to those applications." Midnight, who had proposed Kaminari as a recommended candidate, spoke up. She recounted the incident a few days ago in Omiya Park, where Kaminari had used what appeared to be electrical defibrillation to save a life. His level of control over his quirk had been extraordinarily precise, enough to make her take notice. She paused before admitting, "I later found out that his quirk is officially listed as electrification, not defibrillator, as he claimed at the time. While I was initially irritated that he lied in such a critical situation, it made me realize just how fine his control over electricity must be." Her words caught the room's attention. If Kaminari had indeed been using an electrification-type quirk to perform defibrillation, it implied a level of precision and control comparable to that of a seasoned professional hero. The teachers grew quiet, considering the implications. Such a feat would require not just a high degree of skill, but also remarkable composure for someone so young. "Well, it does sound like he has the potential to be a solid hero," one of the teachers remarked, summarizing the general sentiment in the room. However, All Might, the symbol of peace and the most famous hero in Japan, seemed to be mulling over something different. The towering man with blonde hair and upswept bangs was lost in thought, recalling something Kaminari had said before leaving the scene in Omiya. "Those who break the rules are scum, but those who abandon others are worse than scum." That's a great line, All Might thought, his eyes brightening. Kaminari's words had struck a chord with him, reminding him of a young boy he had recently taken under his wing. A boy with no quirk, frail physical health, and a timid personality, yet one who still charged toward danger to save his friend. "I want to be like All Might and become the strongest hero." That was what young Midoriya had declared with unwavering resolve. But with only 2 days left before the entrance exam, All Might couldn't help but worry if the boy could complete the training task he'd been given. While All Might drifted off into thoughts about his would-be successor, the other teachers continued to discuss Kaminari's abilities. If, hypothetically speaking, Aizawa began, his tone as cold and logical as always. What if Kaminari's apparent defibrillation wasn't a matter of superior control, but rather just a coincidence? What if his quirk's electrical output just happened to be the right level for that particular application? The room grew silent. Midnight felt a momentary chill. It hadn't occurred to her that such an explanation might be more plausible than the idea of a 15-year-old possessing a mastery of electrical control on par with top heroes. But even if that's the case, she countered, Kaminari's perfect academic record should still qualify him as a recommended student. I have some thoughts on that, the principal interjected, his calm voice cutting through the tension. Midnight, who had started to get defensive, quieted down as he spoke. I reviewed Kaminari Denki's file when it first arrived, and I am well aware of his flawless academic performance, he continued. If this were any other year, he would undoubtedly qualify for recommendation based on his grades alone. But not this year, the principal added with a hint of regret. Compared to the 3 students who have already been selected as recommended candidates, Yurashi Inesa, Todoroki Shoto, and Yaoyorozu Momo, Kaminari's overall abilities are relatively mediocre. Mediocre? Midnight was visibly taken aback. Kaminari's track record was as close to perfect as it could get. If that was considered mediocre, then what standard were they applying? I understand your surprise, the principal said gently, but when you compare him directly to our current recommended students, his capabilities in all areas fall short. He went on to explain, for quirk-based abilities, even if Kaminari is capable of using electrification for defibrillation, it suggests a proficiency in quirk control, but not necessarily combat effectiveness. Inesa's Whirlwind and Todoroki's Half-Cold Half-Hot are far more versatile and powerful for combat scenarios. As for academic excellence, Yaoyorozu Momo's knowledge already extends into advanced subjects like the molecular structure of materials. While Kaminari may have achieved perfect scores, Yaoyorozu is already applying her knowledge at a level that goes beyond typical school subjects. The principal's tone grew more solemn. Kaminari Denki might be well-rounded compared to the average applicant, but in terms of what we are looking for in recommended students this year, he lacks a standout quality that sets him above the rest. Midnight clenched her fists but didn't interrupt. She could see that the principal was speaking out of concern for Kaminari's future, not dismissing his potential outright. In today's world, the principal continued, where the number of professional heroes is reaching saturation, we must prioritize those who show exceptional promise. Kaminari may be more suited to a supportive role in the hero industry, or even find a place in the support department, where his talents with electricity could be better utilized. The principal's conclusion was clear. Therefore, the decision of this meeting is that Kaminari Denki will not be accepted as a recommended student. He will participate in the regular entrance exam alongside the other applicants. As the meeting came to a close, Midnight couldn't help but feel conflicted. She believed in Kaminari's potential, but the reality was that UA was a place where only the most extraordinary talents could shine. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Kaminari's journey was far from over. Unaware of the discussions happening far away at UA High School, Kaminari was in his room, completely immersed in his project. He was typing away on his computer, working on a document titled Complete Pokemon World Settings. He had to admit, creating this comprehensive guide was actually a lot of fun. It allowed him to revisit the details of the Pokemon world and the various creatures that populated it. First, he started by listing the major regions: Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, Unova, and others. Originally, he'd considered drawing a full map of the world, but that idea lasted all of 3 seconds before he dismissed it. Who was he kidding? He didn't have a photographic memory to perfectly recall every detail of such a vast map. Luckily, since Pokemon was originally created by a Japanese company, many of the regions were inspired by real places in Japan. Kaminari figured he could let a professional Japanese artist handle the world map. His job was to lay down the essential details, like the world's origins, legendary Pokemon myths, and the intricate ecosystem. He typed up information about various roles in the Pokemon world, such as Pokemon trainers, coordinators, breeders, rangers, and even the ever-present Officer Jennies and Nurse Joys. He made notes on the various leagues, Elite Four members, and even the criminal organizations like Team Rocket and Galactic. After hours of work, Kaminari had managed to get through a lot of the groundwork. He was now moving on to drawing the legendary Pokemon, ensuring that they closely resembled the iconic versions from his previous life. All right, the 3 legendary birds are done. Now, I just need to finish Raikou, and that will complete the 3 legendary beasts. Next up is Ho-Oh. As he spoke aloud to himself, Kaminari paused to reflect, sighing deeply. Man, why didn't I get some kind of system that could summon Pokemon for real? He muttered wistfully. Meanwhile, Japan's MTV Music Network had begun heavily promoting Kaminari's latest song, Hero. Anyone who visited the site couldn't miss the banner showcasing a striking image of Kaminari, the blonde 15-year-old with lightning-shaped black streaks in his hair. The bold text read, "Anyone can be a hero. 15-year-old Kaminari Denki." From the creator of Only My Railgun. It didn't take long for the campaign to gain traction. Within minutes, hundreds of thousands of people had seen the promotion, piquing their curiosity about this young musician who had only recently come into the spotlight. Although Kaminari wasn't a complete unknown, his previous song, Only My Railgun, had garnered some attention. This new track's theme and the story behind it intrigued listeners. Many were eager to see if he could replicate the success of his debut. As they navigated to his page to give Hero a listen, they came across a personal message from Kaminari. "I'm about to take the entrance exam for UA High School's Hero course. This song, Hero, is dedicated to myself, my future school, its teachers, my future classmates, and all those who strive and work hard. Anyone can be a hero." Readers were surprised to learn that this 15-year-old musician was also an aspiring Hero course student at UA, the most prestigious hero school in Japan. The dual ambition of pursuing music and heroics made Kaminari an even more interesting figure. In a small town in Shizuoka Prefecture, a purple-haired girl was sitting in her room, staring at her laptop screen. She had just read Kaminari's message and was intrigued. As someone who had also passed UA's written exam, she realized they might actually meet at the entrance exam. Interesting, she thought, turning up the volume as she clicked to play Hero. The opening beats filled the room, the rhythm electrifying as it pulsed through her high-end surround sound system. Her room, more of a music studio than a typical bedroom, was filled with musical instruments, an electric guitar, electronic keyboard, drum kit, and an array of speakers. Her parents had even soundproofed the walls to accommodate her love for rock music. Yes, she was definitely well off, but her passion was unmistakable. As the prelude played, she felt herself getting absorbed in the beat, her head swaying in time with the drums. "This rhythm, it's amazing," she exclaimed, her foot tapping on the floor. The lyrics began. "Pretending to be brave, I started to get carried away, throwing all important things aside, torturing myself like a prisoner, saying goodbye to myself like this." She raised an eyebrow at the opening lines. "The song is called Hero, but it doesn't seem to be about hero work," she mused. Still, the energy was undeniable, and she kept listening, curious to see where it would go. In another corner of Shizuoka, a boy named Midoriya Izuku had just woken up from yet another exhausting night of training at the Takoba Seaside Park. His phone buzzed with a notification from the Japanese MTV app, promoting Kaminari's Hero. Midoriya was always interested in songs about heroes. While they were just songs, he found that listening to them made his own dream feel more vivid, even if only for a moment. He decided to give the song a listen as he got out of bed, still groggy from his limited sleep. As he listened to the lyrics, one line resonated deeply with him. "What should I do if I'm afraid of that guy?" Midoriya felt a jolt of recognition. He knew that fear all too well. It wasn't just about bullies or villains. It was about the fear of not being good enough, of not measuring up to the standards of those who were born gifted. The song continued to build. "A man should be strong for others. Bite your teeth and make up your mind to persevere to the end." It doesn't matter if you fall down, just stand up again. That's all if you can do it. You're a hero. Midoriya Izuka's heart was instantly set ablaze by these lyrics, and he felt a surge of energy coursing through his veins. The pain and exhaustion from the past 10 months seemed to evaporate in an instant. Clench your teeth. Make up your mind and stick to it. Yes, that's the way it should be. I can't give up now. As the song reached its final verse, the climax began. A man should be strong for others. Compete with everything you've got. It's okay to cry. Just find your smile again. That's all. If you can do it, you're a hero. Yes. Midoriya grabbed his phone, then burst out of his room and headed for the kitchen, his voice ringing with determination. What have I been doing? How can I be so lax? Don't I want to become a hero like All Might? After dinner, I'll head straight to the seaside park to continue clearing the debris. And today, I'm going to sing this song 100 times. 100 times. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the purple-haired girl listened to the line. The same goes for girls. You can't just watch from the sidelines. If it feels right, go for it, as long as you have the courage to take the leap. That's all. If you can do it, you'll be a hero. At that moment, she burst into laughter. She glanced at the high-resolution poster of Kaminari on her screen and whispered to herself, "You talk big, huh? I hope you're just as good at walking the walk when we meet." Hee. She didn't choose to play the song again. Instead, she jumped up, grabbed her electric guitar, and immediately started playing with ease. It was the intro to Hero. She had only listened to it once and already memorized the melody perfectly. Her musical talent was simply astounding. Hero is a hit, a total hit. Kaminari had gained some level of fame. While not a nationwide superstar, he had carved out a name for himself, especially in the small circles of Saitama Prefecture. He was a recognizable figure, at least enough to be considered a local star. As he stood on the subway, he noticed several boys and girls with their phones out, aiming their cameras at him. "You know, you really are a star. I never noticed it before." Tetsu, standing beside him, couldn't help but glance enviously at the excited group of girls nearby who were too shy to approach. Though rough around the edges, Tetsu was still a teenager, and like most boys, he couldn't completely ignore his interest in pretty girls. "By the way, have you been ignoring Japanese MTV completely?" he asked Kaminari. Kaminari, ever the charmer, kept his smile intact while waving to the middle school girls. After hearing their soft gasps of admiration, he signed his name for them and posed for a quick photo. Well, he was aiming to be a big star after all. Gotta start building the fan base young, he thought. Though it also caught the attention of a few confused adults who didn't recognize him. Well, getting surrounded was just part of being a star. Just gotta get used to it. Yeah, just gotta get used to it. Ah, music, huh? I used to listen to some, but not anymore, Tetsu replied, rubbing his nose awkwardly as the lingering scent of the girl's perfume made him feel a little self-conscious. The girls, after excitedly taking their first ever photo with a celebrity, returned to their seats, still giggling and sneaking glances at Kaminari, whispering amongst themselves. Still smiling, Kaminari asked, "So, what have you been up to lately?" "I've been working on that technique you showed me," Tetsu began, sounding a bit proud. "The moment I got home, I went straight to the garden in my apartment complex and started practicing. But before Tetsu could finish, Kaminari interrupted, frowning slightly. "Didn't I tell you? It isn't something you can master in a short time. Don't focus all your effort on it." I know. But listen," Tetsu insisted. "I'm not just practicing that. A couple days ago, I joined a judo gym. I've been training with Sensei Daimon." "Judo?" Kaminari blinked, surprised. He looked Tetsu up and down, then said thoughtfully, "Honestly, with your personality and quirk, you'd probably be better off training in karate or maybe even Chinese Bajikwan." "Really?" Tetsu grinned, though his enthusiasm for judo didn't waver in the slightest. "But I kinda like judo. The throws and grapples are pretty cool." Of course, he wouldn't mention that right now he was the one being thrown around every day. But he believed that soon enough, he'd be the one tossing people left and right. Maybe he'd even try it on Kaminari. "All right, as long as you're enjoying it," Kaminari shrugged. For someone like Tetsu, physical, strength-based combat styles seemed like a perfect fit. But in the end, everyone has their own preferences. Kaminari could only wish him success. By now, it was already February 26th, and the Shinkansen they were riding was speeding toward UA High School in Shizuoka Prefecture. Since Shizuoka was a bit far from Saitama City, the journey took nearly an hour, even by high-speed train. To pass the time, Kaminari played one of his new songs for Tetsu, thinking he'd enjoy it. Sure enough, as soon as Tetsu finished listening, he grabbed the headphones and started looping the track. Kaminari had guessed right, he was into that kind of rock music, full of passion, struggle, and fighting spirit. Though he didn't seem to care much for Kaminari's Only My Railgun. Well, to each their own, Kaminari thought. Personal tastes couldn't be forced. And so, the two 15-year-old boys passed the time. Tetsu sat engrossed in the music, while Kaminari casually chatted with the girls on the train. They both enjoyed the trip, though Tetsu occasionally cast a complicated look in Kaminari's direction. 1 hour, or 60 minutes, 3,600 seconds, to be precise, passed quietly, and soon the train arrived. Kaminari and Tetsu stepped off the Shinkansen at their destination. Well, Kaminari did leave with a few new fans. 3 more, to be exact. It was 8:25 a.m., 35 minutes before the start of UA's practical entrance exam. According to the map, the school was only a 6-minute walk from the station, so the two weren't in any rush. They strolled leisurely toward UA, taking in the sights of Shizuoka. Along the way, they spotted other students, all wearing different middle school uniforms, heading in the same direction. Clearly, these were fellow candidates for the exam. All competitors, Kaminari thought to himself. Both Kaminari and Tetsu were also wearing their old middle school uniforms, as per UA's request. It seemed the school wanted its candidates to present themselves as students. This made Kaminari a little nostalgic. He had thought he'd never wear a school uniform again. But now that he realized he'd grown somewhat attached to it over the past 3 years. We're here. Soon, Kaminari and Tetsu, along with candidates from all over Japan, reached the gates of UA High School. Gates they had only seen on TV before. The heroic protective wall, a massive gate made from a mysterious alloy. According to rumors, not even a main battle tank could take it down. The gate was open now, welcoming the candidates. Signs reading UA High School and entrance exam venue hung beside it. Some candidates had already arrived, entering either alone or in pairs. The atmosphere was tense and quiet. It's about to begin. The big exam with an acceptance rate of 300 to 1, Kaminari muttered to himself as he stepped through the gates. Even with his laid-back personality, he couldn't shake a bit of nervousness. After all, this was a huge moment for him. I heard they're only accepting 40 students out of over 1,000 applicants. Tetsu muttered, his face tight with anxiety. In front of them were 3 large red doors. Only the one marked with a 2 was open, with a sign beside it indicating it was the briefing room for the exam. Just as Kaminari and Tetsu were about to head over, a sharp voice broke the silence from behind them. "Move aside, weakling. Get out of my way, or I'll crush you." The harsh tone echoed through the otherwise quiet area. Kaminari and Tetsu, along with the rest of the crowd, turned to see who it was. A second later, everyone turned back, going about their business. It was just some loud greeting between friends, though the approach was a bit intense. Kaminari did the same, but for some reason, his eyes lingered on a flustered green-haired boy who seemed rattled by the encounter. "Let's go, Kaminari," Tetsu said, curling his lip in mild disdain. He wasn't fond of people who got so easily shaken up. How could someone like that hope to be a pro hero? "Yeah, let's go," Kaminari nodded, but there was an odd feeling nagging at him. Maybe it was just the nerves from the upcoming test? But just as they began to climb the steps toward the red door, a voice called out behind them, "Kaminari Denki." The voice that called out was unexpectedly pleasant, so Kaminari turned around. Tetsu, standing next to him with his hands shoved in his pockets, reluctantly stopped as well, glancing back to see who it was. A girl, another girl? Tetsu's expression immediately stiffened. Is this what it's like to be a star? Girls just call out to you wherever you go. Looks like we really did run into each other here. The girl, with short purple hair, walked up quickly and started looking Kaminari up and down without a hint of shyness, almost as if she were confirming something. Kaminari, ever the showman, flashed a charming smile and said, "Hey, I'm Kaminari Denki. And you are?" Since she was here, it was pretty clear she was also a candidate for the UA entrance exam, possibly even a future classmate. He couldn't afford to act cold or distant, even if he was used to being treated like a celebrity. Not that he was that type of person anyway. "My name's Jiro Kyoka," she said confidently, offering her hand for a handshake. "I'm also here for the hero course. Looking forward to working with you, especially when it comes to rock and roll." She extended her right hand boldly, clearly full of confidence in how she'd perform in the test. Sure." Kaminari was caught slightly off guard, but quickly shook her hand. After all, who would refuse a handshake from a cute girl? Maybe she's an orphan too. Well, as expected, her hands nice and soft, Kaminari thought with an internal chuckle. He shook her hand briefly, then let go. "Hey, there's only 10 minutes left before the briefing starts," Tetsu suddenly said from beside him, his voice flat. He was always punctual. It definitely wasn't because he had any ulterior motives. "And who's this?" Kyoka asked, coolly tilting her head toward Tetsu. Her right hand casually toyed with the headphone jack attached to her ear. A closer look revealed that the jack wasn't just an accessory. It was actually connected to her earlobe, clearly part of her quirk. Is that part of her ability? Seems sound-based, Kaminari noted to himself, making a mental note as he resumed climbing the stairs. He was about to introduce Tetsu, but his friend beat him to it. Tetsu, he declared, puffing out his chest proudly. "I'm Kaminari's best friend, and the future #1 pro hero." Hello," Kyoka replied, momentarily taken aback by his boisterous introduction. But after a brief pause, she gave a genuine smile. Tetsu's straightforward personality was hard to dislike. And just like that, the duo became a trio, with Kaminari leading the way through the open red door labeled 2. Man, talking to girls so easily. At the back of the group, Midoriya Izuku watched them with a bit of envy. He'd just met a girl earlier, but all he did was stammer a few words. He didn't even manage a proper response before the moment passed. Even though it had been thrilling just to have a girl speak to him, he couldn't help feeling a little regret. Seeing Kaminari chat so effortlessly with girls only made him more self-conscious. As he stared after them, a lyric from the song Hero, a song he'd had on repeat for days, popped into his head. Even with girls, you've got to take the first step. You can't just sit and watch. Have the courage to speak up. Courage, Midoriya muttered under his breath, clenching his fists tightly as determination swelled inside him. 10 minutes later, in a spacious lecture hall filled with rows of seats, the exam briefing finally began. The event was hosted by the one and only present Mike, a top-tier pro hero known for his DJ skills and signature booming voice. Behind him, a massive electronic screen displayed the UA emblem, simple but unmistakable. Every student in the room immediately recognized it. "Welcome, everyone, to my live broadcast," Present Mike announced, his energetic voice echoing through the hall. "Everybody say hey." His over-the-top energy, combined with his rap-like tone, was both amusing and distinctly his own. It almost felt like an American rapper speaking Japanese. This was his unique style, and the students familiar with him couldn't help but get a bit excited. Well, except for the fact that everyone was still too nervous to respond. Silence filled the room as no one dared to follow his cue. Kaminari smirked at the awkwardness. This was amusing, especially when Present Mike awkwardly muttered about how boring the students were for not playing along. Kaminari thought this whole exchange did wonders to ease the tension in the room. Meanwhile, Tetsu and Kyoka, sitting on either side of him, were both clearly more nervous than he was. They hadn't said a word since entering the hall, their lips pressed into thin lines. Well then, dear listeners, let me give you the rundown on today's practical exam. Despite the lack of enthusiasm from the audience, Present Mike recovered quickly, launching into his usual routine. The guy was a pro, after all. but he still couldn't resist trying to get one more interaction. "Are you ready?" Silence. Again, Kaminari couldn't help but chuckle under his breath. The only person who seemed genuinely excited by Present Mike's energy was Midoriya, who had probably been a fan of his broadcasts for years. Kaminari could tell he admired Present Mike quite a bit. Just like it says in the exam guide, you'll all be participating in a 10-minute simulated cityscape battle. You're allowed to bring anything you need. After I finish explaining, you'll head to your designated test sites. Kaminari glanced at the exam ticket he'd received earlier and noticed that he, Tetsu, and Kyoko were all assigned to the same test site C. That brought a mix of relief and anxiety. While it was nice to be with familiar faces, they were also direct competitors now. But Kaminari's mind was elsewhere. His focus was more on understanding the rules that Present Mike was explaining. In an exam like this, knowing the rules inside and out could make all the difference. With over 1,000 candidates and only 40 spots available, he couldn't afford to slip up. As Present Mike continued, the screen behind him switched to a series of images. Each test site is filled with various categories of villains, and they're divided by difficulty. Defeating them will earn you points based on their level. Use your quirks to defeat these villains and rack up as many points as you can. That's the name of the game. The villains are robots, Kaminari observed, easily recognizing the shapes shown on screen. A wave of relief washed over him. If they were robots, well, this was going to be fun. Present Mike then spun around dramatically, pointing toward the audience and giving a stern warning. And remember, attacking fellow candidates is strictly prohibited. Such behavior goes against the spirit of being a hero, the spirit of heroism. Huh? Kaminari thought. While this line might not have meant much to some of the other students, it struck a chord with him. He was starting to piece together the deeper meaning behind this exam. Coupled with what he already knew about UA, he felt about 80% confident in his theory. But something still didn't sit right. "I have a question." A sudden voice broke through Kaminari's thoughts. A tall, imposing figure in the crowd raised his hand, and a spotlight immediately illuminated him. What followed was a pointless back and forth that, in Kaminari's eyes, wasted everyone's time. Kaminari sighed in annoyance. The guy's question was self-righteous and unnecessary. UA wouldn't have such a glaring loophole in their exam. Sure enough, Present Mike casually thanked him and moved on. The fourth category of villains is worth 0 points. They're only there to slow you down. There's one at every test site. While they can be defeated, it's not worth your time. I recommend you avoid them at all costs. This is it. Kaminari's eyes lit up. He was now 90% sure he'd cracked the code of this exam. The structure of this test. It's a bit predictable. The briefing session was short and straight to the point, giving Kaminari a glimpse of the UA High School's efficient, no-nonsense approach. Afterward, the candidates changed into the casual clothes they had brought and gathered at the playground behind UA. Dozens of buses were already lined up, waiting to take them to the exam simulation sites. Following instructions, each candidate found the bus that corresponded with their designated testing location, as indicated by the number on their admission ticket. They were headed to UA's renowned simulation city, where the practical part of the entrance exam would take place. Despite the lack of any supervisors to maintain order, the scene was remarkably calm and disciplined. No one cut in line, and no one made any unnecessary noise. Everyone was focused, silently preparing themselves for what was to come. The simulation city was said to be the size of about 4 blocks, and there were 7 of these massive areas in total. Clearly, such a large space couldn't be located within Tokyo itself, which explained why UA High School was situated out in Shizuoka Prefecture. It also explained the need for the bus ride. The 40-seat bus took them more than 40 minutes from the school to the test sites. During the ride, Kaminari noticed a shift in the atmosphere. As soon as the bus left UA's campus, the tension in the air lightened, and the candidates started chatting. They began introducing themselves to each other, talking about their quirks, sharing their nerves, or excitedly expressing their dreams of becoming pro-heroes. The once silent bus was now buzzing with conversation. Even the more introverted candidates seemed to relax, listening curiously to their peers and occasionally joining in. Kaminari smiled, enjoying the change. He liked this livelier atmosphere much better than the earlier tension. "Kaminari, are those gloves special or something?" Jiro Kyoka, who had been sitting next to him, asked, noticing the blue crystal-like feature embedded in the glove on his right hand. Her question caught the attention of Tetsu, who was sitting in the seat ahead of them. He had noticed Kaminari's gloves earlier when they were changing, but had assumed they were just for show, maybe a flashy accessory. After all, why would anyone put a big crystal on their glove? Still, he had to admit, the design looked pretty cool. Oh yeah, these gloves are actually really important to me, Kaminari said, holding up his right hand and admiring the glove. They were custom-made, ordered by his father from the famous tech hub Island. It had taken over 3 months for them to be completed, and they arrived just in time for the exam literally the night before. His father had been worried that they wouldn't arrive in time, but thankfully, the delivery came through at the last moment. These gloves represented not only Kaminari's equipment, but also his father's high hopes for him. "Equipment?" Jiro asked, her curiosity piqued, while Tetsu leaned closer to get a better look. "Yeah," Kaminari nodded. "The gloves are made from a lightweight alloy. They're not super strong, just tough enough to block things like fruit knives, but they have great conductivity." He flexed his hand, demonstrating. "With these gloves, I can save about 20% of the energy I use when I channel electricity through my fists." Jiro and Tetsu were intrigued, especially by the blue crystal embedded in the glove. "As for this crystal," Kaminari said, tapping it lightly, "I'm not exactly sure what it's made from, but I know it's a high-tech battery. It's pre-charged and can store enough power to last me for 3 years." He smiled. "Since my quirk lets me store electricity in my body and discharge it at will, these gloves let me recharge whenever I need to. They're perfect for keeping me powered up during a long fight. As for the design, that was my idea. I figured since I'll be wearing them a lot, they might as well look cool, right?" Hearing that the gloves were ordered from the famous Island, the candidates nearby, especially Jiro and Tetsu, were impressed. Island was renowned for its cutting-edge tech, and having custom gear from there was no small thing. Kaminari's equipment put him a step ahead of the competition, at least in terms of preparation. But he didn't seem to care much about how others viewed him. His mind was already racing ahead, strategizing for the test. He knew the test would involve battling robots, which made him feel pretty confident. But there was something else about the test that nagged at him, a detail he couldn't shake. Still, he kept it to himself. He didn't want to sound overconfident or arrogant. After 40 minutes, the buses finally began to split off, each heading toward one of the 7 simulation zones. Kaminari's bus came to a stop in front of a towering iron gate, more than 10 meters tall. Another bus pulled up right behind them, and soon, the candidates were being instructed to exit in an orderly manner. The exam would start in just 10 minutes. As they stepped off the bus, the atmosphere shifted once again. The nervous tension returned. Everyone dealt with it in different ways. Some took deep breaths. Some stared at the sky in silence. Others, like one overly eager candidate, began doing push-ups on the spot. Among Kaminari's group, Jiro put her headphones back on, listening to music to calm her nerves. Kaminari noticed, with a small smile, that she was listening to his song, "Only My Railgun." Tetsu, meanwhile, had his eyes closed, inexplicably stepping in place as if preparing for a sprint, gradually increasing his speed. As for Kaminari, his preparation was a little more subtle. He quietly ran small currents of electricity through his muscles, using them to stimulate and relax his body from head to toe. Suddenly, the massive iron gate in front of them began to open silently, without even a creak. Some of the candidates who had been focused on their own preparations didn't even notice at first. Those who did were momentarily stunned by the door's silent movement. "The exam begins now," a voice rang out, breaking the silence. Kaminari didn't wait. He tapped Tetsu and Jiro on the shoulders, signaling them, before he wrapped himself in crackling electricity and launched forward. He shot through the open gate, his body a blur of golden lightning. From this moment on, they were no longer just friends. They were competitors. Kaminari knew he had to take care of his own score first. He could worry about helping them later. When you're struggling, take care of yourself. When you're thriving, you can help others. That had always been Kaminari's philosophy. Following Kaminari's lead, the rest of the candidates snapped into action, scattering in all directions, each chasing after their own goals. Not long after Kaminari sped into the simulation city, the first villain appeared before him. It was a humanoid robot, moving swiftly on two wheels. Its steel arms gleamed in the sunlight, and a camera-like device on its head flashed red as it locked onto Kaminari. Target acquired. Eliminate. With a loud mechanical whir, the robot rushed toward him at full speed. But just as it was about to attack, a chaotic golden current surged through its body, paralyzing it instantly. The wheels screeched to a halt. Boom! A moment later, the red light on the robot's head dimmed as its systems powered down. Kaminari, without even glancing back, continued forward, having fully expected this outcome. It's just like I thought, Kaminari muttered to himself, a satisfied smirk on his face. I might be able to help Tetsu and Jiro soon after all. I've been getting the same question over and over, and I'm tired of answering it. So I'll just leave this here. The MC doesn't know anything about MHA, because it didn't exist in his world. If he seems like he's got a handle on things, it's because he's clever. He's watched tons of anime and read plenty of comics, so he can figure out common themes and patterns in a world like MHA. Any knowledge he shows comes from his own smarts and observations, not because he knew anything about the series beforehand. And if you can't stomach that, there are countless fanfiction stories on this platform besides this one, to be honest. There's definitely a big flaw in this exam. Kaminari streaked down the street, sparks and lightning crackling in his wake. Any candidates who had tried to approach him didn't last more than 10 seconds before storming off in frustration, dark looks on their faces. They quickly realized that unless they had quirks that enhanced their speed, there was no way they could keep up with Kaminari. While it might take others 3 or 4 seconds to take down a robot, Kaminari could do it in just one, barely breaking a sweat. He didn't even need to use his hands. Just a quick brush of his clothes as he sped past was enough to short-circuit the machines. What the others didn't know, though, was that Kaminari's actions weren't as random as they appeared. It wasn't just about running fast and zapping anything in sight. His movements were precise, calculated. Every time he passed a robot, he intentionally grazed the core, the red light at the front of each machine, which housed its control center. That was the key. While dodging their attacks with lightning speed, Kaminari targeted that spot and let his electricity burn out the internal power supplies. But to the other candidates, Kaminari's finesse went unnoticed. All they saw was someone dominating the battlefield, mowing down robots with ease thanks to his quirk and his speed. Back at UA, the principal, along with the hero instructors, including all, might watch the exam unfold on their monitors. Kaminari's performance hadn't escaped their attention, and they couldn't help but nod in approval. His control over his quirk, his ability to read and react to the robot's movements, and his composure while moving at high speeds were all clear signs of his skill. After years of effort, Kaminari's potential was finally blossoming. But as Kaminari sped through the exam, he couldn't shake the thought that something was off about the whole setup. This exam is unfair. It had only been 4 minutes since the test started, yet Kaminari had already cleared an entire street of robots. Now, standing atop a tall building, the wind swirling around him, he surveyed the area. His gloves, with their blue gems gleaming in the sunlight, pulsed with electricity as he considered the problem. The exam's goal was to simulate a scenario where the candidates, as stand-in heroes, would be fighting off villains attacking the city. But the issue was that these villains were robots. That meant the difficulty of the test depended entirely on the candidates' quirks. Kaminari himself was the perfect example. Even if he wasn't relying on his high-speed movements, his electricity alone would have made short work of the robots. The only difference would have been the speed at which he racked up points. But what about someone with a quirk that was ineffective against robots? What if their powers were more suited for taking on biological enemies? In that case, they'd be at a severe disadvantage. If I had been born with a quirk like the Sharingan, for instance, Kaminari mused to himself. There'd be no way I could pass this test. He'd have been forced to rely entirely on physical combat, which, while possible, would be far from ideal. But thankfully, Tetsu and Jiro didn't have that problem. Their quirks were still useful here, even if their method was less flashy than his. As Kaminari's thoughts wandered, he finally spotted his two friends down below. Tetsu and Jiro had teamed up, working in tandem. One would distract the robot, drawing its attention, while the other would use their abilities to deliver the final blow. Jiro would plug her headphone jacks into the ground, sending shockwaves that disoriented their competition long enough for Tetsu to smash the robot with a punch. They swapped roles seamlessly, with Tetsu using his steel body to block anyone trying to muscle in on their fight. Their teamwork was impressive. Even if they were slower than Kaminari, they were methodical, and that made them stand out to Yue's teachers as well. Seeing this, Kaminari grinned as golden electricity crackled around him. It was time to lend a hand. In an instant, Kaminari leapt from rooftop to rooftop, dashing toward Jiro and Tetsu. His sudden appearance caught the attention of the other candidates, especially those who had been frustrated by his earlier performance. What's his deal? They thought. He already took over one street. Now he's coming here to steal more points? They watched as Kaminari made his approach, glaring at his seemingly endless greed. So selfish. This guy's unbelievable. Meanwhile, Jiro and Tetsu had just taken down another robot when they spotted Kaminari approaching. Their faces lit up with surprise and excitement. Kaminari, Jiro called out, waving. Come on, follow me. Kaminari shouted, not wasting any time. He gave each of them a quick pat on the shoulder, and suddenly, both Jiro and Tetsu felt an electric surge run through them. Their bodies hummed with energy, temporarily boosted by Kaminari's quirk. What the? This is high-speed movement. Tetsu exclaimed, feeling his body lighten instantly. Jiro's eyes widened in shock as she too felt the unfamiliar rush of speed. But neither of them hesitated. They knew exactly what Kaminari was doing, and without missing a beat, they chased after him as he bolted ahead. The other candidates could only watch, stunned, as the three of them sped off together. Hey, that's too much. He's boosting them too. That's basically cheating. Cries of outrage filled the air, and some candidates even accused Kaminari of breaking the rules. But as time passed and no reprimand came from Yue, it became clear that Kaminari had done nothing wrong. Back at Yue, the teachers were surprised by Kaminari's decision to help his competitors. But after careful review, they found that he hadn't violated any rules. The exam guidelines prohibited using quirks to attack others, but there was nothing against helping fellow candidates. Still, no one had expected Kaminari to use his abilities to assist his competition. With their newfound speed, Tetsu and Jiro easily destroyed the robots Kaminari had disabled ahead of them. Kaminari hadn't completely fried the machines this time. Instead, he had wrapped them in electricity, scrambling their systems temporarily. It was almost like putting the robots in a mechanical version of paralysis. The momentary confusion allowed Jiro and Tetsu to finish the job before the other candidates could catch up. As they chased after Kaminari, both Jiro and Tetsu couldn't help but admire him. This wasn't just about scoring points anymore. Kaminari was proving himself to be someone worth following. But then, suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled violently. For a moment, the candidates thought it was an earthquake. After all, this was Japan, where quakes were frequent. But the rumbling stopped as quickly as it started, and when they looked up, they realized the true cause. A massive robot taller than the buildings around it loomed ahead of them. It was the Zero Pointer, a giant machine meant to test the candidate's ability to handle overwhelming threats. No way. That thing is huge. Tetsu gaped in shock at the towering figure in front of them. President Mike said we're supposed to avoid those, Jiro reminded them, watching as the other candidates scattered in a panic, fleeing from the enormous robot. And we've probably got enough points to pass, she added, already starting to back away. No. Kaminari's voice cut through the chaos, stopping both Tetsu and Jiro in their tracks. We need to take this thing down. What? Tetsu and Jiro turned to him, confused. The Zero Pointer was worth no points. There was no logical reason to fight it. But Kaminari stood firm, electricity sparking at his fingertips. Right now, we're acting as professional heroes, remember? When you're a hero and you come across a villain that poses this much danger to the city, you don't just ignore it because there's no reward. Tetsu and Jiro fell silent, his words sinking in. Even the teachers watching through their monitors at UA were momentarily speechless. None of them had expected Kaminari to understand the deeper meaning behind the test so quickly. Meanwhile, in Area B, Midoriya was sprinting toward the zero-pointer himself, determined to save the girl trapped beneath the rubble. "I've got a plan," Kaminari said, turning back to face his friends with a confident grin. "But it's only got a 50% chance of working." He paused for a moment, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Do you trust me?" Seeing Kaminari's confident smile, Jiro felt a bit flustered. But beside her, Tetsu stomped his foot, raised his clenched fists, and flashed a fierce grin. "Well, since you said so, let's do this." At that moment, Tetsu looked undeniably cool. "Jiro." Kaminari grinned as he bumped fists with Tetsu, then turned to Jiro. "What do you want to do?" Jiro asked, curling her lips in mock irritation. Her response made both Kaminari and Tetsu smirk with satisfaction. In that moment, they knew they could trust her. Jiro was no longer just a classmate. She was a teammate. Real partners aren't formed by words alone, but through shared efforts and actions. And when you truly connect with someone, there's always a bit of reality that comes into play. No matter how passionate or idealistic your dreams may be, they need to be grounded in the real world. "All right, first thing," Kaminari said, his smile fading into a more serious expression. He focused on the task at hand, but then he turned to Jiro and asked something that left her puzzled. "You have a music player on you, right?" At this point, the massive zero-pointer robot was less than 60 meters away, its sheer size displacing dust and debris as it crushed the surrounding buildings. "Yeah, why?" Jiro replied, clearly confused. "When the time comes, cue up Only My Railgun. Set it to loop, and crank the volume to max," Kaminari said, completely serious. Jiro. Tetsu. Back at UA High School, the heroes and teachers, still reeling from the spectacle of Midoriya's one-punch takedown of the zero-pointer in Area B, were left speechless once again by Kaminari's odd request. "Why?" Tetsu asked, dumbfounded. Playing music at full volume during an emergency like this? He couldn't wrap his head around Kaminari's reasoning. "BGM. You can't have a moment this epic without an equally epic battle song. It's gotta get everyone hyped," Kaminari explained, waving his hand as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "All right, let's focus on what we need to do next." Jiro and Tetsu exchanged resigned glances, choosing not to argue. They simply nodded, ready to follow Kaminari's lead. After all, whatever weird ideas he had, they knew he had a plan. 10 seconds later, they sprang into action. Since the high-speed boost on Jiro and Tetsu had worn off, Kaminari quickly recharged them with another jolt of electricity, just in case things went south. It would ensure they had enough mobility to escape if necessary. Now for the strategy. Jiro detached her headphone jack from her ear and set up the music, despite thinking Kaminari's request was absurd. Meanwhile, Kaminari and Tetsu, now glowing with golden electricity, dashed into a nearby building, racing up the stairwell at lightning speed. As for the elevator, please like that could keep up with them. "Kaminari, why'd you say this ultimate move you're planning only has a 50% chance of success?" Tetsu asked as they rushed up the stairs. "Because it's huge. I've never faced anything this big before." Tetsu fell silent, unsure if Kaminari meant to say that in such a weird way. Thankfully, they reached the top floor before he had time to question it further. Only a flimsy iron door stood between them and the rooftop. Boom! Tetsu kicked the door off its hinges with ease, and they stepped onto the spacious rooftop. Ahead of them, the colossal zero-pointer robot lumbered forward, unstoppable. Liberation. Keep the dream engraved in your heart. I won't even hesitate to leave the future behind. Ignore the meaningless so-called limits. Below, Jiro had started the music, the familiar lyrics of Only My Railgun echoing in the distance. Though the volume wasn't deafening from this height, it was enough to get Kaminari's blood pumping. His heightened physical senses, thanks to his quirk, made the song crystal clear. Kaminari's excitement surged. For the first time, he could experience the kind of climactic, BGM-fueled moment that anime protagonists got to enjoy. Here we go, Tetsu Tetsu, right behind you. With a loud tearing sound, Tetsu Tetsu activated his quirk, ripping off the remnants of his upper clothing. His steel body gleamed in the sunlight as he took his place in front of Kaminari. Bring it on. Meanwhile, down below, Jiro was carrying out her part of the plan. She stood dangerously close to the crumbling wreckage caused by the zero-pointer's rampage, as chunks of debris fell around her. But wrapped in Kaminari's golden current, she showed no fear. Instead, she focused, extending her headphone jack toward the ground. Then, with precise timing, she activated her quirk. The amplified sound of her heartbeat, multiplied tenfold, surged through her headphone jack and into the ground. The result was immediate. Crack, crack, boom. The ground in front of Jiro shattered in a fan-like pattern. The solid concrete reduced to rubble in seconds. Not enough. Jiro gritted her teeth. She knew her job wasn't just to destroy the ground, but to slow down the zero-pointer as much as possible, giving Kaminari and Tetsu Tetsu time to set up their attack. Without hesitation, she darted forward, dodging the falling debris with her boosted speed. She positioned herself just 10 meters ahead of the giant robot, dangerously close. At this distance, Jiro could feel the ground trembling beneath her feet as the towering machine approached. The teachers monitoring the situation grew tense. With Yue's recovery girl in Area B, any injuries Jiro suffered here might not get immediate treatment. There are only 3 minutes left in the exam. Present Mick's voice suddenly echoed across the exam site. At the same time, only my railgun reached its climax. Lookin', the Blitz loops this planet to search away. Only my railgun can shoot it. Right now, on the rooftop, a beam of dazzling golden light burst from Kaminari's location. It tore through the air, a brilliant streak of electricity arcing toward the zero-pointer. Jiro, the UA teachers, and all the candidates in Area C who hadn't already fled watched in awe as the beam sliced through the massive robot like it was made of paper. The golden light struck the zero-pointer's control center with pinpoint accuracy, piercing through its core. Super, electric, magnetic, railgun. Kaminari's triumphant roar echoed louder than the explosion that followed. As fire and lightning engulfed the giant robot, Kaminari stood on the rooftop, his blonde hair blowing in the wind, looking every bit the hero he aspired to be. Well, except for the part where Tetsu Tetsu was launched off the rooftop in the process. Exam over. Present Mick's announcement echoed from the loudspeakers, followed by an alarm-like buzzing sound that resonated throughout all 7 simulation communities. But in Area C, none of the candidates moved. Instead, they stood there, wide-eyed, staring in the direction of the enormous beam of light that had just obliterated the zero-pointer. The giant robot continued to explode in a spectacular fashion, a constant reminder of what had just transpired. And of course, the song Only My Railgun kept playing on a loop in the background, adding to the surreal atmosphere. To be fair, the candidates weren't the only ones caught off guard. The teachers back at UA were equally shocked. Most of them had been focused on the events in Area B, where Midoriya's punch had taken down a zero-pointer. No one had seen the massive beam of light coming from Area C until now. One thing was clear. Whatever had just happened was well beyond the capabilities of the average student. It was one thing for Midoriya to destroy a robot with a punch, even at the cost of serious injury. But in Area C, the zero-pointer had been completely annihilated, its core pierced clean through. The thought crossed their minds. What if that beam had been directed at a person? Let's not jump to conclusions. Nizu, the principal, a small, white, rat-like creature, clapped his paws to gather the teacher's attention. We'll know more once we review the footage. With quick, practiced movements, he typed on the keyboard before him, merging 6 of the small screens into one large display. Soon, they were watching the event unfold from a satellite view, capturing every moment of Kaminari's actions from above. Yes, UA had satellites, and it seemed they had more than one. Quite the powerful school, indeed. On the screen, Tetsu, whose skin had turned dark due to his steel quirk, stood shirtless in front of Kaminari. The tattered remains of his clothes lay scattered around, making the scene look a bit unusual. But Kaminari's expression was completely serious. He stretched his arms forward, placing them parallel to either side of Tetsu's steel frame. Golden electricity began crackling between Kaminari's arms. The currents were controlled, obediently flowing between his hands without leaking. This steady buildup lasted for about 20 seconds before small sparks started dancing across Tetsu's body. Then, something remarkable happened. Tetsu's steel form began to rise slowly off the ground. Though he only floated about 10 centimeters into the air, the effect was clear. He was hovering, kept within the field of energy between Kaminari's outstretched arms. Tetsu, looking visibly tense, closed his eyes and lifted his arms, bringing his palms together as if in prayer. In this moment, he entrusted everything to Kaminari, putting his complete faith in his friend. Gradually, Tetsu's body shifted from upright to horizontal, transforming him into a human-shaped steel missile aimed directly at the approaching zero-pointer. And then Kaminari's eyes sharpened. Golden electricity erupted from him, filling the rooftop with an intense surge of power. The current was so strong that even the residual charge lit up the surrounding area, turning the rooftop into a danger zone crackling with energy. Super, electric, magnetic, railgun. The words barely left Kaminari's mouth before the electricity condensed into a blinding golden beam, shooting forward with incredible speed. The beam tore through the air and pierced the center of the zero-pointer, effortlessly cutting through its metal frame like a hot knife through butter. Only after the massive robot exploded did Kaminari's voice catch up to the action. The teachers watching the footage heard his triumphant shout at the same time they witnessed the zero-pointer's fiery destruction. Silence hung over the UA staff room. Principal Nizu, All Might, and the rest of the teachers were speechless for a moment. What had they said during their meeting a few days ago? Kaminari's control over electricity was nowhere near that advanced, right? Hadn't they concluded that Kaminari wasn't as strong as other top candidates like Yurashi Inasa or Todoroki Shoto in terms of raw combat power or mobility? Could those two even beat Kaminari in a one-on-one duel now? Kaminari was supposed to be mediocre when it came to academics and strategic thinking, right? Then how in the world had he pulled off a move that involved electromagnetism? That was no beginner's trick. The string of rhetorical questions left the teachers with nothing to say. If Midoriya's punch in Area B had surprised them, then Kaminari's electromagnetic railgun had left them completely floored. Well, they'd subconsciously ignored Tetsu's role in all this. There wasn't much to say about him after all. He'd been launched like a projectile. But Kaminari was clearly the star of the show. But what was Kaminari doing now? On the screen, Kaminari's posture had changed. He was giving two enthusiastic thumbs up, strutting around aimlessly, his expression oddly triumphant. Is he congratulating himself? All Might muttered, a confused look on his face. This strange behavior felt familiar. No, All Might quickly reminded himself. I'm a teacher at UA now. I can't think of these students as anything other than potential heroes. No, I must remain professional. But I can't hold it back anymore. He looks like an idiot, came a cold, deadpan voice from behind. All Might, along with the other teachers in the room, exhaled as if a huge weight had been lifted from their shoulders. They'd been thinking the same thing, but hadn't dared to say it out loud. They turned to see Aizawa, better known as Eraserhead, standing behind them. This is probably his quirk's limit, Aizawa continued, his tone thoughtful. He wasn't making a joke. He was seriously assessing Kaminari's condition. After all, with Kaminari looking like a shoo-in for Class 1A, Aizawa knew he'd be responsible for him soon. Understanding Kaminari's limits was crucial. Yes, there's a note in his file, Principal Nizu confirmed, his sharp mind recalling all the candidate data. Kaminari Denki is prone to short-circuiting his brain if he releases more electrical power than his body can handle in a short period of time. On the screen, Kaminari seemed to snap back to normal. He glanced around nervously, as if checking to make sure no one had seen his embarrassing moment. After confirming the coast was clear, he casually adjusted his clothes and hair, trying to look as cool as possible. With a confident smile, he walked to the edge of the building, standing amid the sparks and fire of the destroyed robot. The fast-paced melody of "Only My Railgun" was still playing as he gave a thumbs up toward the ground below. Jiro Kyoka, looking up at him, couldn't help but smile. All Might. Principal Nizu. Aizawa Shoyuta. The rest of the hero teachers. Among the incoming students of UA's hero course, they were witnessing the rise of a truly unique individual, a boy with incredible power and a flair for theatrics. All the teachers couldn't help but smile, albeit with some exasperation. Meanwhile, over in Area B, boom. Tetsu, forgotten by everyone in the aftermath of the Zero Pointer's destruction, had been launched by Kaminari's blast. Driven by the force of the impact, he crashed into the ground, creating a crater. Coincidentally, he landed right next to Midoriya, who lay unconscious, his injuries already healed by Recovery Girl's quirk. Recovery Girl stared at the unconscious Tetsu, a confused look on her face. What in the world? Sigh. Kaminari, now drained of electricity, stepped into the elevator and hit the button for the ground floor. The elevator's quiet hum filled the air, the only sound as he descended. No BGM, no explosions, just the soft whir of the machinery. This was a rare moment of peace, giving him time to think. It wasn't that Kaminari didn't want to keep up his cool, high-speed movement entrance, with Only My Railgun blasting as he heroically swept Jiro off her feet from outside the building. But his body had other plans. The super electromagnetic gun he'd just used had wiped out all the electricity in his system. Luckily, the glove on his right hand had started recharging him. The crystal on the back of his glove emitted a soft, glowing blue light as it worked. Now, about that electromagnetic railgun. In truth, that move was Kaminari's strongest attack. But before this, his railgun had only been a knockoff version of Misaka Makoto's technique, using coins as a medium. The range was short, and the power output was capped, with a maximum distance of only 50 meters. The reason for using coins, aside from being easy to carry, was his control over electromagnetism. It simply wasn't strong enough for anything more complex. Unlike the Misaka Makoto of another world, Kaminari had some serious limitations to consider. That's why when he told Tetsu and Jiro he had a 50% chance of success, he was honestly overselling it. The actual odds were way lower. If the railgun failed, the worst that would happen was that he'd run out of power without being able to launch Tetsu at the Zero Pointer. Still, it had been a gamble worth taking. After all, what's life without a little risk? As long as you're prepared for the consequences and can handle them, why not go for it? And this time it had paid off. Not only had Kaminari secured passing marks for himself, Tetsu, and Jiro, but he'd also grabbed the attention of UA's teachers. Most importantly, though, he had gained a deeper understanding of his railgun technique. This wasn't something he could have learned from studying electromagnetism in textbooks. It was the kind of knowledge that came from real experience, from pushing his limits in the heat of battle. While the payoff might not be obvious yet, Kaminari knew that in the future, this experience would be crucial for developing more advanced electromagnetic techniques. Still, I should brush up more on electromagnetism. Ding! The elevator reached the first floor, the soft chime snapping Kaminari out of his thoughts. The metal doors slid open with a cold, mechanical precision, as if to silently remind him it was time to leave. Kaminari. Jiro Kyoka's voice echoed through the entrance hall as she rushed toward him, clearly relieved to see him. Huh. Jiro looked around the elevator, puzzled. Where's Tetsu? Oh, him. Kaminari started, walking out of the elevator as he explained the chaotic events that had unfolded on the rooftop. Jiro listened, her mouth opening in disbelief. By the time Kaminari finished, she managed to distill her complicated emotions into one simple phrase. So the light that just shot out was Tetsu. When they stepped outside, Jiro frowned as she stared in the direction Tetsu had been launched. Is he going to be okay? He'll be fine, Kaminari said, shaking his head. The force from the electromagnetic push would have died down after it penetrated the Zero Pointer. I aimed to send him far, but not too far. After all, the weight difference between a coin and Tetsu was massive. Just because Kaminari could shoot a coin 50 meters didn't mean he could launch Tetsu the same distance. After that, it was just inertia. But with Tetsu's steel body, he'll be all right. Plus, we're still within UA's grounds. Heroes must have already recovered him by now. That said, only Tetsu could have survived that kind of high-risk stunt. If anyone else had tried it, things might not have ended so well. Recovered, Jiro muttered, her lips twitching at the odd choice of words. Still, the mention of UA heroes reassured her, easing her worry about Tetsu. Soon, Kaminari and Jiro reached the exit of Area C. The space was filled with candidates, many of whom looked battered and bruised after their encounters with the robots. But the moment Kaminari and Jiro appeared, all eyes were on them. They all wanted to know what had caused that massive beam of light and why Kaminari had bothered with the zero-pointer, knowing full well it didn't award any points. Most of the candidates had enough brains to figure out there had to be more to the story. But Kaminari wasn't in the mood to explain. He was exhausted. Ignoring the stares, he gestured to Jiro and led her toward the exit, slipping through the crowd and heading toward the large iron gates. He knew that once they left the simulation community, there would be little chance for him to see or interact with the rest of the candidates anytime soon. Their paths were likely to diverge. Well, except maybe if they liked his music. Some might brag about taking the UA exam alongside Kaminari Denki, the rising star with the hot new single. But let's be real when it came to exams like this. Any talk of friendship before competition was just an empty platitude. The cold, hard fact was that only 40 out of over 1,000 candidates would pass. Well, actually, excluding the 4 recommended students, only 36 people would make it through those gates wearing the UA school uniform tomorrow. Kaminari climbed onto the bus, returned to his seat, and closed his eyes. He needed rest. There was so much to look forward to, becoming a hero, meeting new friends, and of course facing new villains. Having watched tons of anime in his previous life, Kaminari knew all too well that in a world filled with quirks, heroes, and villains, conflict was inevitable. It was part of the balance. Although Kaminari didn't aspire to be a typical, professional hero, by choosing this path, he'd knowingly stepped into the middle of that conflict. But wasn't that what made life exciting? In his old world, a world without quirks, Kaminari had spent countless hours fantasizing about moments like these. Now, those fantasies were becoming reality. How could he back down now? This was why he'd spent 80% of his free time studying, training, and preparing himself. Otherwise, wouldn't it have been easier to just copy songs and animations, become a pop star, and make a fortune that way? But then what? What if a villain threatened him or his family? Was he supposed to just sit on his wealth, hoping some professional hero would show up in time to save them? No way. It was better to be strong, to have the power to protect the people around him. And as for being a star, well, why not have both? Kaminari Denki wanted it all. With a new life ahead of him, why not make it as extraordinary as possible? If that meant trading away his leisure time, sweat, and hard work to achieve it, then so be it. He had no regrets. Meanwhile, the buses carrying candidates from all the major simulation communities were making their way back to UA High School, where their fates would soon be decided. In the teacher's lounge, the principal and the instructors began their final discussions about who would be placed in Class 1A of the Hero course. UA's rules were strict. Only 40 students would be admitted into the Hero course, with Class A and Class B each having 20 members. For names were already set in stone: Kaminari, Tetsu, Jiro, and Midoriya. They had passed with flying colors in terms of their performance, their hero spirit, teamwork, and the potential of their quirks. No debate was needed. As for Midoriya, his performance spoke for itself. The real discussion, however, was focused on 2 candidates, Minoru Mineta and Eijiro Kirishima. Mineta had the lowest score in the practical exam, and his quirk was more suited to support than direct combat. Kirishima, on the other hand, had a high score, but his quirk overlapped significantly with Tetsu's, and his overall performance hadn't been as strong as Tetsu's. Now the question was clear. Who would be asked to withdraw from Class 1A? At this moment, the comprehensive results of the practical test were tallied and displayed clearly on UA's large screen. Number 1, Kaminari Denki, 103 hero points, 50 rescue points. Number 2, Bakugo Katsuki, 087, 00. Number 3, Tetsu 060, 20. Number 4, Jiro Kyoka, 053, 20. Number 5, Kirishima Ijiro, 039, 35. The most impressive result was Kaminari's. Not only had he racked up an incredible score, but he had also impressed the judges with his hero spirit and exceptional teamwork. Even though the special rescue points weren't necessary for him, the examiners had still awarded him a symbolic 50 points. Because of this, the discussion among the teachers regarding Kaminari was brief. He was guaranteed to be in Class 1A, so there was no point in debating further. Only Midnight, UA's alluring and playful pro hero, glanced at Kaminari's name with a mischievous smirk. She was looking forward to the next time they met, especially after he'd deceived her during the exam. It's not very gentlemanly to toy with a woman's heart, she muttered to herself, amused. With Kaminari's placement secured, the real discussion about the distribution of students into Class 1A and Class 1B began. If we're going purely by scores, Minoru Mineta should be placed in Class B, Principal Nizu began, swiftly pulling up Mineta's exam data and his recorded performance. But as we all know, class assignments are not based solely on scores. Minoru Mineta's quirk is pop-off. Those round, grape-like objects on his head are extremely sticky. They can remain stuck to a person for more than 24 hours and regenerate quickly. However, if he uses too many in a short period of time, he begins to bleed from his scalp. Nizu continued, referencing the quirk analysis on the screen. Present Mike whistled and leaned back in his chair with a grin. TSK, control-type quirks. Perfect for heroes. Indeed, Midnight agreed, thoughtfully touching her chin. While heroes need the power to deal serious damage when necessary, capturing and restraining villains is always the preferred method. This kid's quirk is perfect for that. The other teachers quickly nodded in agreement. As professional heroes themselves, they could all see the practical applications of Mineta's quirk in various situations. Even though Mineta had ranked near the bottom of the results, his quirk was highly useful. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that he belonged in Class 1A. Vlad King, the teacher in charge of Class 1B, raised a practical point. Are we really going to move Kirishima Ijiro to Class B, just because his quirk overlaps with Tetsu's? He pulled up Kirishima's data on the screen, comparing it with that of other candidates. Kirishima ranked 5th in the exam. It doesn't seem fair to move him, especially when we've got other candidates like Rikido Sato, whose quirk overlaps with theirs. Or take Koji Koda and Toru Hagakure, for example. They're also among the lower ranks and have more support-based quirks. All Might, Nizu, and the rest of the teachers paused, considering Vlad King's point. Then Principal Nizu turned to Aizawa Shoyuta, the pro-hero Eraserhead, who had been standing silently at the back of the room. As the homeroom teacher for Class 1A, what do you think? Aizawa squinted at the screen, studying the profiles of the candidates for a long moment before his muffled voice finally emerged from behind his scarf. I've made my decision, he said, his tone flat yet decisive. Meanwhile, the candidates were once again passing through the gates of UA, though this time they were leaving, not entering. Each of them carried the weight of uncertainty, knowing that not everyone would be returning. Some had already accepted that this was the closest they'd ever get to becoming a hero. The reality was sinking in. At only 15 years old, they were already facing the harshness of the world. But Kaminari and Jiro were not among the crowd heading home just yet. Instead, they were standing in UA's infirmary, watching over a snoring Tetsu, who was lying on a bed. Recovery Girl, the pro-hero with the quirk that allowed her to speed up healing, had reassured them that Tetsu wasn't hurt, he was just knocked unconscious from his earlier missile adventure. The boy who had been sent to the infirmary with Tetsu, Midoriya Izuku, had already left. Kaminari heard his injuries were much worse, but Recovery Girl had healed him enough to go home. So what now? Jiro asked with a chuckle, glancing at their still sleeping friend. Simple. Kaminari smirked, raising his right index finger and poking Tetsu's arm. A small, controlled spark of golden electricity zapped through his finger with a crackling sound. Wake up time. Ah! Tetsu shot up in bed with a shout, his steel skin activating out of pure reflex. His eyes darted around the room in confusion. Why are you here? No, where am I? He looked down at the blanket covering him, then at Kaminari and Jiro, before blurting out, Wait, what about the exam? Seeing there was no immediate danger, his body returned to its normal state. The exam's over, Jiro replied, hands in her pockets. Over, Tetsu repeated slowly, rubbing the back of his head as he swung his legs off the bed. So, did we pass? I'm not sure yet. President Mike said the final results will be mailed to us, Kaminari said, giving Tetsu a light punch to the chest. But don't worry, we totally passed. All three of us. Tetsu let out a long sigh of relief. Phew, good. I just wanted to get through that exam. All right, let's exchange contact info with Jiro, and then we can head home, Kaminari said, yawning as he thought about the long journey ahead. The Shinkansen would take another hour to get him back to Saitama, and the thought made him sigh inwardly. While many students would be looking to rent a place closer to UA, Kaminari had no such plans. In his previous life, he'd had a distant relationship with his parents, but now that he had this second chance, he cherished every moment with them. Maybe most people didn't understand that feeling, but for Kaminari, each home-cooked meal made by his mom was a small joy he couldn't give up. He was willing to endure the 2-hour commute just for that. And besides, he could always use the travel time to study electromagnetism or catch up on other subjects. After saying their goodbyes to Jiro, Kaminari and Tetsu made their way to the underground station where their journey had begun earlier that morning. You know, Jiro's pretty lucky. It only takes her 15 minutes to get home from UA, Tetsu said with a hint of envy as they walked. So, do you want to rent a place nearby? Kaminari asked casually. I thought about it, Tetsu admitted, before striking a pose that mimicked a judo stance. But not anymore. I've fallen in love with practicing judo with Sensei Daimon. No way I'm giving that up just because of a longer commute. Oh, is that so? Impressive. Kaminari glanced at him with a smirk. So, how many moves have you mastered so far? Tetsu froze, his face turning sheepish. He quickly looked away in embarrassment. I don't want to talk about it. It was 3 o'clock when Kaminari and Tetsu left UA High School, and by the time Kaminari finally arrived home, it was already 4:35 p.m. Since it wasn't yet dinner time, the usual aroma of home-cooked food was absent from the house. However, both his parents were there, which surprised Kaminari. You're home early, he said, looking at his father. This isn't your usual time to get off work, right? Kaminari's father grinned with pride, ruffling his son's hair as he replied, Today's the day of your hero exam. How could I focus on work when that's all I've been thinking about? His mother, who had been standing nearby, came over to take his backpack containing his casual clothes and gloves gently from his shoulders. With an expectant smile, she asked, So, how did it go? Kaminari beamed confidently. I'm 99% sure I passed, he declared. In front of his parents, there was no need to be modest. Haha. Kaminari's father burst into laughter, clearly pleased. He trusted Kaminari's words completely. If his son said he'd passed, then it was as good as done. By the way, his father continued, how did those gloves work out? His question shifted the mood to a more relaxed, lively atmosphere. Kaminari's father had spent a lot of money on those gloves, so naturally, he wanted to know if they'd lived up to expectations. They were great, really smooth when charging, Kaminari said with a nod, glancing at the gloves his mother had set on the coffee table. But it would be nice if they had a few more features. Oh, his father asked, intrigued. What features? For starters, a built-in music player would be cool, Kaminari said with a smirk. And maybe the ability to shoot barbed wire, especially the latter. That would give me some long-range capture ability. His father and mother exchanged amused looks. The barbed wire suggestion made sense, but they couldn't help but be puzzled by the music request. Still, Kaminari's father nodded. All right, write down your ideas when you get the chance, and I'll contact the company to see if they can add those features in a second modification. That would be awesome. Kaminari grinned, already imagining the upgrades to his gear. But before he could get too lost in thought, his father interrupted him. By the way, there's something else I need to tell you, his father said, his tone shifting. Your song Hero has climbed to number 3 on MTV's best-selling list. Since last night, we've been flooded with calls from media outlets and companies. Kaminari blinked in surprise as his mother looked at him, eyes sparkling with pride. So, my son's really becoming a big star, huh? She teased lovingly. Kaminari scratched the back of his head. I wouldn't go that far. The song's popular, sure, but I'm not exactly a household name yet, right? He looked at his father, who usually kept up with these things more closely. Ha ha. His father laughed heartily again. Wrong guess, kid. Wrong. Yep. Remember when you announced that you were aiming to get into UA's hero course? His dad pulled out his phone, opened the MTV app, and showed Kaminari his artist page. Turns out, the massive popularity of Heroes has gotten people more interested in you too. That announcement gave Hero a huge boost. The folks at MTV say that if you actually get admitted to the Hero course and post your acceptance letter, your fame will skyrocket even more. Kaminari's father looked serious now. You've got a decision to make, son. You could strike while the iron's hot, accept media interviews, sign advertising deals with companies, and officially debut as a 15-year-old hero student. Or, Kaminari understood the weight of the choice in front of him, but he wasn't fazed. He'd already mapped out his life plan long ago. Dad, I want you to decline all the interviews and add deals, Kaminari said calmly. For the next 3 years, I'm going to focus entirely on my hero course, train hard to master my quirk, and work toward getting my hero license. His eyes were steady, showing no hesitation. From now on, my only identity will be as a student in UA's Class 1A who also happens to like singing. Of course, I'll still post photos and updates on MTV when I have time, and if I can, I might release new songs every now and then. But my priority is becoming a hero. Hearing this, Kaminari's father felt a wave of pride wash over him. His son was different, and he knew it. Most families might see this kind of opportunity as too good to pass up, thinking that fame and money were within reach. But to Kaminari's father, the path of a professional hero was on an entirely different level. Becoming an entertainment star couldn't compare to the prestige and fulfillment of being a hero who saves lives. Besides, the family didn't need Kaminari to bring in money at such a young age. Financially, they were more than stable. In fact, his business had been doing better than ever lately, with unexpected smoothness in government dealings and commercial ventures. Everything seemed to be going their way. With a confident smile, Kaminari's father placed a hand on his son's shoulder. All right, I'll handle everything on my end. You focus on your studies and your training at UA. He patted Kaminari's shoulder lightly and added, I'll do whatever I can to support your dreams. Now go rest, you've earned it. From a young age, Kaminari's father had noticed that his son was special, especially in terms of intelligence. There were times when he wondered if Kaminari's real quirk had something to do with his IQ. But in any case, Kaminari had proven time and again that he could handle himself. Meanwhile, Kaminari's mother had gone back to her room to change into a coat. She was planning to make a quick run to the nearby Tamade supermarket to pick up some fish and meat for dinner. Her son had been through a lot at the UA exam, and she wanted to make sure he was well fed tonight. Just as Kaminari was about to head to his room, he turned to his father and said, Oh, by the way, Dad, I sent the rough drafts for Pokemon to your office computer earlier. His father's eyes lit up. You finished it already? That's great news. His smile grew even wider. It felt like everything was falling into place, lately one good thing after another. I've already found a cartoonist to start working on it tomorrow, his father added, clearly excited about the project. Already? Who's the artist? Kaminari asked curiously, though he wasn't expecting any big names. Oh, his name is Junichi-san. He's a young, relatively unknown cartoonist with solid drawing skills, but he's not great at coming up with original stories. His father admitted with a bit of embarrassment. He had tried reaching out to more well-known artists, but they either weren't interested in collaborations like this, or their asking prices were through the roof. So he had settled on a newcomer like Junichi, figuring that fresh talent might be more energetic and easier to work with. As expected, Kaminari thought to himself, but he wasn't bothered by the choice. He knew how strong Pokemon as a franchise could be, and it might actually be a good thing to help a new artist rise along with the story. The next morning, on February 27th, the family of three had a simple breakfast together. After seeing his father off to work, Kaminari settled into his room to tackle his own tasks for the day. At the top of his list, designing his hero costume. After passing the written exam, UA had required all prospective students to submit their ideas for their hero costumes, and Kaminari had handed in a basic concept at the time. But last night, something unusual had happened. UA had called him to say that the original support company responsible for his costume had passed the project over to a Mitsui-owned support company, which was now asking him to resubmit his design with as many specific details as possible. This was highly unusual. Typically, support companies only accepted a small portion of a student's design ideas when making costumes for free. And while the quality of the materials used was always top-notch, it wasn't common for them to allow this much input. Both Kaminari and UA had been left speculating as to why Mitsui was taking such an interest in his costume. Some of the more gossipy staff even wondered if Kaminari might be the illegitimate son of a Mitsui executive. But Kaminari wasn't concerned. If they were offering better equipment, why not take advantage of it? It didn't do him any harm, after all. The costume's gotta be cool, and it's gotta stand out. Maybe a skateboard, but without wheels. I bet Mitsui can handle that, and I definitely need to factor in some defensive features. February 28th, the official opening day of UA High School, started bright and early at 7:30 in the morning. After finishing the breakfast his mother had carefully prepared, Kaminari donned his freshly pressed UA school uniform, along with his cool electric gloves. Under his mother's gentle and encouraging gaze, he stepped out the door, ready to begin a new chapter in his life. His father had already gone down to the underground garage, preparing to personally drive Kaminari to the subway station for this important day. Kaminari understood his father's feelings, and, rather than rejecting the offer out of concern for wasting time, he accepted it. Sometimes, letting your parents show their care makes them happier. Soon enough, Kaminari got out of the family's black BMW, standing at the subway station entrance. While the station was close by, his father seemed absolutely thrilled to be a part of this moment, which warmed Kaminari's heart. "Thanks, Dad," Kaminari said with a smile as he waved goodbye. His father waved back enthusiastically before driving off. As Kaminari approached the station entrance, a loud voice suddenly called out. "Kaminari!" Tetsu, who was waiting by the entrance, shouted excitedly upon seeing him. "Huh!" The moment he yelled, however, the attention of people nearby, those on their way to work or school, was immediately drawn to Kaminari. They all glanced over at him curiously. "Hey, that guy looks kind of familiar," murmured a girl in a white school uniform, her long, light blue hair flowing down her back. "Are you kidding? That's Kaminari Denki," her friend gasped, giving her a little push. "You were just listening to Only My Railgun yesterday, weren't you? Wait, really? Let me check." The blue-haired girl quickly opened her phone and pulled up the Japanese MTV app, comparing the photo of Kaminari on the screen with the boy standing at the subway entrance. In seconds, her jaw dropped. "It's him. It's really Kaminari Denki. I can't believe we're seeing a celebrity in real life." And just like that, it was as if a spark had ignited in the air. More and more students began recognizing Kaminari, whispering excitedly among themselves. Seeing such a popular star, one of their own age, no less, wasn't something that happened every day. Click, click, phones were whipped out in an instant, and the crowd around Kaminari began snapping pictures of him. Some of the office workers, who hadn't initially realized what was going on, started taking pictures too, thinking they might be able to brag later about spotting a celebrity on their way to work. Suddenly, the familiar opening notes of Only My Railgun began to play, coming from somewhere in the crowd. The song was instantly recognizable. Even the adults who weren't familiar with Kaminari had heard the tune on the radio or TV countless times before. Kaminari couldn't help but smile his signature handsome smile. Curiously, he looked toward the source of the music and found it was coming from a black-haired girl standing next to the blue-haired one. She looked absolutely thrilled to have caught his attention. The girl had done it on purpose. She'd played Only My Railgun on her phone just to grab Kaminari's notice. And now, her heart was pounding with excitement. With her pink phone still playing Only My Railgun, the girl hurried over to Kaminari, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Hi, my name is Mizuko Minami. I'm a second-year middle school student, and I really love your song Only My Railgun and Hero. Could we, maybe take a picture together?" Her words stumbled slightly, whether from excitement or nerves, but she managed to get her request out in one breath. Kaminari smiled warmly. "It's an honor to know you like my song," he replied graciously. "I'd be happy to take a picture, but just one, okay? Like you, I've got school to get to." Mizuko's face lit up with joy, and she eagerly grabbed the hand of her blue-haired friend, pulling her close. The two girls flanked Kaminari, while Mizuko held up her phone to snap a selfie. But as she positioned the phone, she realized it was too close to capture all three of them properly, which made her panic. After all, this was a rare chance. If the picture didn't turn out right, she'd regret it forever. Ahem. Tetsu awkwardly cleared his throat, stepping forward. I could take the picture for you if that helps." You are?" Mizuko blinked in surprise, but quickly noticed Tetsu's UA uniform. "Wait, are you a hero student too?" "Yeah, his name is Tetsu," Kaminari chimed in with a grin. "He's my best friend and classmate." "Wow, meeting two future heroes in one day," Mizuko said excitedly, handing her phone to Tetsu. Then, with a playful smile, she added, "Make sure the picture comes out great, all right? And when you're done, we'll take one with you too." After all, who knew? One day, Tetsu could become a famous pro hero too. No need," Tetsu mumbled, suddenly shy. It seemed even the normally tough Tetsu got nervous around girls, which Kaminari found pretty amusing. The picture was taken, and Mizuko was thrilled with the result. True to her word, she also took a picture with Tetsu, who, despite blushing furiously, managed to stand still long enough for the shot. After thanking them both, the two girls happily waved goodbye and headed off to school. Phew. Tetsu wiped non-existent sweat from his forehead, chuckling. "Looks like you've gotten really popular, Kaminari. I guess I can't just call out your name in public anymore." "Huh. All right, let's go," Kaminari laughed, clapping Tetsu on the shoulder. "The Shinkansen leaves in 10 minutes. We don't have time to mess around." With that, the two of them entered the subway station. Though the crowd of students and office workers was disappointed they didn't get to snap a picture with Kaminari themselves, they were still satisfied with the close-up shots they'd managed to get. At the very least, they had a great story to tell later that day. After an hour-long train ride, during which Kaminari reviewed some material on electromagnetism, they arrived once again in Shizuoka Prefecture, at the gates of UA High School. The two of them stood in front of the massive protective wall, gazing up at the Hero School emblem etched into the stone above them. After a moment of silence, Tetsu broke into a grin. "Hey, Kaminari, starting today, we're officially UA students, huh?" "Yeah," Kaminari nodded. "Are you ready?" "Definitely," Tetsu replied with confidence. Together, the two of them stepped forward, walking side by side through the gates. Behind them, the morning sun rose higher, casting a golden glow that formed the perfect backdrop. "Heroes, here we come." "Kaminari, Tetsu," a familiar voice called out from behind them. When they turned around, they saw Jiro Kyoka running toward them, the sunlight framing her figure as she waved excitedly. She blended into the scene so naturally, it felt like the perfect moment. From a distance, the three of them, Kaminari, Tetsu, and Jiro, all dressed in their UA school uniforms, with the hero emblem shining in the background, made for a picture-perfect sight. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, a green-haired boy was stepping out of his house. Under the encouraging gaze of his mother, he took a deep breath and let the morning sunlight bathe his face. "All might," "Here I come," he shouted, determination filling his voice. And with that, everything truly began. "This place is huge," Tetsu exclaimed as he looked around the sprawling campus of UA High School in awe. "For real," Jiro agreed, glancing around as well. She tried to be discreet, but her eyes flickered over the other students wearing the same UA uniform as them, clearly just as curious. "And there are so many students," Tetsu added, his initial excitement cooling off as his expression became more neutral. He even started stuffing his hands into his pockets, like he was already used to the vibe of being at UA. It was easy to tell that Tetsu was beginning to see himself as part of this prestigious hero school. His demeanor showed how simple guys like him could adapt quickly. "Well, that makes sense," Kaminari chimed in from the front, keeping his eyes on the signs directing them toward Class 1A. UA doesn't just have the hero course, but also the support course, business administration, and even regular academic tracks. But even for the general subjects, UA accepts way fewer students than other schools. The entrance exams for UA, whether practical or written, are no joke, Kaminari continued, leading the way as the three of them entered an elevator to the 5th floor. The elevator opened to reveal a large hallway. To the left were classrooms for the support and business administration courses, and on the right were those for the hero course. "Here it is. Hero course, Class 1A, Kaminari announced as they approached a door with 1A painted in bold red letters above it. The number seemed almost too large, giving the door an intimidating presence. But there was no reason to be nervous. They'd made it. They were here, ready to meet their classmates and start their journey as heroes. Kaminari, with a calm expression, pushed the door open and stepped inside. He felt a surge of curiosity more than anything, wondering who his new classmates would be and what kind of quirks they had. As the door swung open, the room fell silent. The students who had already taken their seats turned to look at the three newcomers. For a moment, everyone just stared at each other, as if sizing one another up. Then, a tall boy in the back with glasses suddenly stood up. With a serious expression, he walked toward them, stopping in front of Kaminari, Tetsu, and Jiro before extending his right hand. "Good morning," he said in a formal tone. "I am Ida Tenya from Somei Private Academy. I look forward to working with you all." Kaminari recognized him immediately as the same Ida who'd left a strong impression during the entrance exam. Despite their tense interaction back then, Kaminari didn't hold any grudges. He reached out and shook Ida's hand. "Kaminari Denki," he introduced himself. "Jiro Kyoka," Jiro said coolly, giving a small nod. Tetsu, on the other hand, puffed out his chest and declared proudly, Tetsu. "I'm going to be the hardest, most hardcore hero out there." For a moment, no one in the room reacted. But a red-haired boy sitting near the back raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Though he said nothing, it was clear from his expression that he was already making a mental note to challenge Tetsu at some point. The three of them made their way to seats by the windows, with Kaminari taking the middle one. As soon as he sat down, a taller-than-average girl with long black hair sitting nearby turned to look at him, her eyes lighting up with interest. "Kaminari Denki." Yeah," Kaminari responded, flashing a polite smile, already used to people recognizing his name. "Hello, my name is Yayarozu Momo," she said with a warm smile. "I've heard your music before." Kaminari's eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised to meet someone here who knew his music. Yayarozu continued, "I'm not particularly into rock, but your songs are really enjoyable to listen to, especially Only My Railgun. Though I think Hero is more of a boy's song," she added with a playful glint in her eyes. "Thanks. It's an honor to know you liked them," Kaminari replied smoothly, having heard similar compliments from fans many times before. Even though Yayarozu was a beautiful girl, he remained composed. Puffed. Yayarozu suddenly laughed, giving him a playful glance. "Come on, we're classmates now. Is it really okay to be so formal?" She then leaned in slightly and added with a teasing smile, "I've seen your page on MTV before." That's not how you replied to comments on there. Kaminari was momentarily speechless, while the other students who had been observing the exchange began whispering among themselves. Some of them seemed to be connecting the dots, realizing that Kaminari might actually be more than just a regular student. A pink-haired girl sitting nearby quickly pulled out her phone and, after a moment of searching, gasped, "Wait a minute, you're the guy who sang Only My Railgun." As soon as she said it, the rest of the students who were unfamiliar with the music scene started reacting too. Several of them took out their phones and began searching for him. And soon the room was buzzing with murmurs of surprise. "It's really him. No way. Our classmate is the creator of Only My Railgun," exclaimed Toru Hagakure, whose invisible figure was only noticeable by her floating clothes. Tetsu kept glancing at her, clearly fascinated by her quirk. "Wait, Hero is your song too? I've listened to that track at least 10 times, shouted the red-haired boy from earlier, Kirishima Ijiro. Even students who hadn't joined in on the phone searches, like Todoroki and Tokoyami, now glanced at Kaminari with mild interest. Kaminari raised a hand, giving a small wave as he addressed the class. "Thanks, everyone. I appreciate the support, but remember, right now, I'm not a singer or a star. I'm just a student in Class 1A of UA, just like all of you. I look forward to working with you." His calm response was met with approving nods. Kaminari knew this kind of attention wouldn't last long. After today, once everyone got used to him, it would all die down. They'd see him as a fellow student rather than a celebrity. Bang! The door to the classroom suddenly swung open with a loud crash. The sound reverberated through the room, and everyone froze. All eyes turned toward the entrance, where a boy with spiky, ash-blonde hair stood. His whole posture screamed arrogance. From the way he walked to the way he carried himself, he looked more like a delinquent than a student. With a loud thud, he slumped into a seat in the back of the room, casually propping his feet up on the desk. Kaminari watched him with mild annoyance. He didn't know this guy personally, but he didn't like him already. There was something about his demeanor that just rubbed Kaminari the wrong way. It wasn't just a matter of age. It was something simpler than that. He just didn't like this type of person. At this moment, Ida couldn't sit still. He stood up, walked over to Bakugo and shouted, "Don't put your feet on the desk." "Huh?" Bakugo sneered, his sharp eyes glaring at the boy in glasses who dared to challenge him. "It's disrespectful to UA's seniors and the people who made these desks." Ida continued with a serious expression, his sense of justice overpowering any fear he might have had. Bakugo, who was already irritated, found this comical. He laughed in disbelief. It was rare for him to meet someone so straightforward who wasn't afraid of him. "Don't give me that crap. And who do you think you are, huh? What school did you even come from, huh? Some extra middle school." Bakugo taunted, his eyes flashing with disdain. Before Ida could respond, Kaminari, who had been silently watching this exchange, couldn't take it anymore. Bakugo's arrogance was grating on his nerves. He wasn't used to seeing this level of rudeness, especially from someone aiming to become a professional hero. He interjected, his tone calm but firm. "Does it matter where he graduated from? He told you to put your feet down. Cut the nonsense and listen. Or do you not understand simple neon? Maybe you have some kind of defect. You bastard." Bakugo's temper flared as he locked eyes with Kaminari, his hands instinctively curling inward, ready to ignite his quirk. "What? Not happy about it?" Kaminari shot back, completely unfazed. Without hesitation, Tetsu stood up, his fists clenched. He cracked his knuckles and smirked, stepping up beside Kaminari. "If you don't like it, tough luck. Hold it in. You want to die?" Bakugo growled, his eyes darkening as he stood up, ready to escalate the situation further. "Die?" Kaminari's eyes narrowed at the word. This guy's aggression was completely out of place. Was he really aspiring to be a hero? His entire attitude seemed more fitting for a villain. Kaminari didn't feel like backing down, but he also knew that fights weren't allowed. Still, he was confident that if things came to blows, Tetsu would hold his own. Before anything could happen, Kaminari noticed something out of the corner of his eye. He turned his head slightly and saw a green-haired boy standing hesitantly at the door. The tension in the room shifted as more people took notice of him. Bakugo's expression changed the moment he spotted the boy. His lips curled in a sneer, but after a moment, he grumbled something under his breath and sat back down, shooting Tetsu a warning glance. For whatever reason, seeing that green-haired boy had made Bakugo back down. His feet didn't go back up on the desk either. With the situation diffused, Ida, ever the representative of proper behavior, quickly went over to greet the green-haired boy. Soon after, a cheerful girl with brown hair, Uraraka Ochiko, joined them. But Kaminari's focus shifted. He was waiting for the person who mattered the most in this moment. Their teacher. And then, the door creaked open again. But this time, what Kaminari saw was unexpected. A man in a yellow sleeping bag, lying on the floor, made his way into the classroom. His movements were sluggish, his hair disheveled, and his eyes half closed as if he'd just woken up. "If you're here to mess around or make friends, go do it somewhere else," he said in a monotone voice, not even bothering to stand up properly. "This is the hero course." The class fell into an awkward silence. They didn't know what to make of this strange sight. "It took 8 seconds for you all to shut up," the man muttered as he finally stood up, emerging from the sleeping bag with an exhausted expression. "That's way too long. You're all unreasonable." Kaminari felt a twinge of disappointment. This was their homeroom teacher? He had been expecting someone more dynamic. This guy looked like he could barely be bothered to be here. Kaminari couldn't help but wonder if this teacher even had the energy to fight. "I am your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shota." The man finally introduced himself in a low, lazy voice. Most of the class exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the kind of hero teacher they'd imagined. Hadn't they heard that All Might would be teaching at UA? Shouldn't their class, being the top hero course, have someone like him as their teacher? But Aizawa didn't seem to care about their internal doubts. He pulled a bag from his shoulder, rummaging through it before pulling out blue and white tracksuits. "Don't waste time. Put these on and meet me at the training ground." 10 minutes later, the class gathered on the empty playground. It wasn't that the students were slow to change, but the boys and girls had to take turns using the indoor changing rooms. The girls, naturally, took a bit more time. Kaminari had noticed something during the break. A short boy, barely over a meter tall, had been lurking near the girls' changing room, trying to eavesdrop with a perverted grin on his face. This purple grape boy had definitely left an impression on Kaminari, though he didn't know his name yet. He was curious about what kind of quirk this kid had to match such a sleazy personality. Once everyone was gathered in their sportswear, Aizawa, who had been standing around looking like he was about to fall asleep, finally addressed them. "Today's lesson is a quirk apprehension test," he announced bluntly. Uraraka, who had been looking forward to the entrance ceremony, let out a disappointed groan. But Aizawa shut down her complaint without hesitation. "If you want to become a pro hero, there's no time for pointless ceremonies," he said coldly. "I see," Kaminari thought. "So, the reason we haven't seen anyone on the playground is because everyone else went to the entrance ceremony." It was becoming clear that Aizawa's teaching style was no nonsense. And honestly, Kaminari liked it. He had always hated long, boring ceremonies. Aizawa explained the premise of the test. Unlike the usual physical tests they had done in middle school, this time, they would be using their quirks to push their abilities to the limit. There were 8 events in total: ball throw, standing long jump, 50-meter dash, endurance run, grip strength, repeated side jumps, sit-ups, and a forward bend. Though the exercises were familiar, Kaminari felt a surge of excitement. Using their quirks to test basic abilities? This was a chance to see what everyone else's powers were, and he was eager to see how his classmates would perform. His thoughts wandered again, imagining the possibilities. Maybe there was someone like Tetsu with quirks akin to the X-Men from his previous life. That would be pretty cool. But his train of thought was cut off when Aizawa suddenly called his name. "Kaminari Denki. You came in first during the practical exam, correct?" "Yes," Kaminari replied confidently, noticing Bakugo's irritated expression at being outdone by him. "How far could you throw a ball in junior high school?" 72 meters, Kaminari answered nonchalantly. He wasn't boasting, he'd worked hard for those results. After years of consistent training, his physical fitness was well above average. He might not have Tetsu's raw strength, but compared to the other students, he was sure he'd hold his own. 72 meters. Bakugo scoffed under his breath, clearly unhappy. His own record was 67 meters, and he didn't understand how Kaminari, who didn't seem particularly strong, could throw farther than him. But Bakugo didn't know that Kaminari had been training for almost a decade. If he did, he'd probably be even more upset. "Now use your quirk and try again," Aizawa instructed, handing Kaminari the ball. Kaminari stepped up to the white circle that marked the throwing position. Everyone's eyes were on him. "All right, let's see what my limit is," Kaminari muttered to himself as he focused his energy. High-speed movement, activate. Electricity crackled to life, enveloping Kaminari in golden arcs of lightning. The air around him buzzed with energy, and his cells fired into action as the current surged, especially around his right arm. The power radiating from him increased steadily, and the current on his arm intensified as he prepared to throw. With everyone watching closely, Kaminari took a deep breath. And then crack! As Kaminari swung his arm with precision, the ball in his grip shot into the air, enveloped in golden arcs of electricity. It streaked across the sky like a glowing meteor, leaving a dazzling trail of light behind. The ball flew higher and farther, pushed by the force of Kaminari's electric-enhanced muscles. Everyone watched in awe as the ball soared until the electric current fizzled out, and gravity pulled it back down to Earth. 412.7 meters. Aizawa announced calmly, holding up the rangefinder for everyone to see. "This is how you figure out your limits." In his mind, however, Aizawa was analyzing Kaminari's quirk usage with keen interest, stimulating his muscles with electricity to boost physical strength. "It's an interesting approach," Aizawa mused silently. "The control he demonstrated, channeling that electricity into his throw, he's definitely trained for this." Meanwhile, the students erupted into a mixture of gasps and excited chatter, the impressive distance Kaminari achieved sparking their admiration. "Whoa, no way. Over 400 meters. This is so awesome. We get to use our quirks freely. Being in the hero course is seriously cool." Their excited outbursts, however, didn't go unnoticed by Aizawa, who gave them a sharp look. "Fun, huh?" His voice was low, but it cut through the chatter, catching everyone's attention. "Huh?" Midoriya and the others blinked, confused. "If you think this is all just fun and games, you're in for a rude awakening." Aizawa's tone suddenly turned cold. "Do you really think you'll become pro-heroes with that mindset?" The class fell silent, tension rippling through the air as Aizawa continued. "If that's your attitude, I might as well let you know right now. The student who ranks last in this test will be expelled." "What?" The collective shock from the class was immediate. Even Kaminari, Todoroki, and Tokoyami couldn't help but stare in disbelief. Is he serious? Expelling someone on the first day? Kaminari's thoughts raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was similar to something a certain masked ninja from his past life would do. Wait, what if he's not kidding? His expression turned serious, and he noticed other students like Todoroki and Yaoyorozu doing the same. Clearly, some of them were realizing the gravity of Aizawa's words. Aizawa smirked slightly, lifting the long strands of hair that usually obscured his eyes. "Welcome," he said, his tone both mocking and challenging, to the hero course of UA High School. Uraraka Ochiko, who had been silently brimming with excitement for the entrance ceremony, couldn't hold back her frustration. "That's just not fair," she protested, voicing what many others were likely feeling. "It's only our first day." Kaminari shared her sentiment, but something told him there was no point in arguing. He had a gut feeling that if Aizawa said he could expel someone, then it was within the school's rules to allow it. Around him, other students seemed to realize the same thing. Yaoyorozu, Tokoyami, and Todoroki all remained silent, their expressions serious. They knew this was no time for complaints. Aizawa's voice cut through again, this time softer but no less intense. Natural disasters, major accidents, rampaging villains. These kinds of unreasonable situations can happen anywhere, at any time. That's the world we live in now. He didn't need to raise his voice for the impact of his words to hit home. The weight of his message settled on the group, and the once enthusiastic atmosphere turned somber. "And the ones who stand in the way of all these disasters are heroes," Aizawa continued. "If you're hoping to coast through these next 3 years without pushing your limits, then you're in the wrong place." The students, now fully silent, felt the immense pressure that came with the title of professional hero. Aizawa's gaze swept across them before he concluded with one final statement. The road to becoming a pro hero is paved with suffering, and UA will give you plenty of it. You're either moving forward or falling behind. That's the reality. His eyes gleamed slightly as he added, so remember this. Plus ultra. Kaminari wasn't sure if it was his imagination, but he could have sworn Aizawa's usually tired demeanor brightened a little when he said those last two words. Whether it was excitement or something else, Kaminari wasn't sure. But what he was sure of was that he had made the right choice by coming to UA. There was no doubt everything from now on would be beyond anything he had ever experienced before. Let's get started. Aizawa signaled the beginning of the quirk apprehension test. First up, the 50-meter dash. Ready, go. With the sound of the starting signal, Ida Tenya rocketed forward, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. His glasses were off, and his face was set in concentration. His engines roared as he sped toward the finish line, his powerful quirk propelling him far ahead of Ajui Tsuyu, who was leaping along behind him. 3.04 seconds came the result. Whoa, his quirk is insane. Kaminari couldn't help but be impressed, especially at the sight of the exhaust vents on Ida's legs. It was such a unique and fascinating ability. Next up were Uraraka Ochiko, Aoyama Yuga, Shoto Todoroki, and Bakugo Katsuki. Kaminari watched each of them closely, observing their quirks with interest. From the explosion-fueled speed of Bakugo to the gleaming laser of Aoyama, each student demonstrated abilities that were impressive in their own right. Kaminari mentally noted their quirks, already thinking about how they might compare to his own electric powers. Final group. Todoroki Shoto and Kaminari Denki, Aizawa called out. Kaminari blinked in surprise as his name was called. His competition would be Todoroki? He hadn't interacted with him much yet, but from what he had seen, Todoroki exuded a quiet, confident aura. Unknown to Kaminari, Aizawa had grouped them together on purpose. He wanted to see how the top scorer from the practical exam would match up against Todoroki, who had been accepted through recommendations. Both had been trained in their quirks for years, and Aizawa was curious to see whose abilities would shine brighter in a speed test. As Kaminari and Todoroki lined up at the starting line, neither seemed particularly fazed. They exchanged a brief glance, but otherwise remained calm. Despite the competitive atmosphere, neither felt especially pressured by the matchup, but those watching felt differently. Kaminari's going to win. Speed is his thing, Tetsu declared, confident as always, with his hands still in his pockets. Yeah, he's super fast, Jiro agreed, recalling the lightning speed she had experienced firsthand. But their conversation caught the attention of Yaoyorozu Momo, who overheard them and decided to chime in. You guys clearly don't know about Todoroki's abilities, do you? Huh. Tetsu and Jiro both turned to look at her, curious about what she meant. Yaoyorozu crossed her arms, her gaze drifting toward Todoroki. Shoto Todoroki is the strongest recommended student this year. Tetsu frowned, not fully convinced. So, what's his quirk? Ice, Yaoyorozu explained simply. He can create and control ice. Ice, huh? Tetsu mused, rubbing his chin. It sounds powerful, sure, but how does that make him faster than Kaminari? Kaminari's speed is no joke. Yaoyorozu didn't respond directly, but instead shrugged, her expression calm. You'll see soon enough. Todoroki's training with his quirk is on a whole other level. As the two boys stood ready at the starting line, Kaminari glanced sideways at Todoroki. There was a quiet intensity in Todoroki's demeanor, but Kaminari wasn't fazed. He was confident in his speed. Everyone get ready, came Aizawa's voice, giving the two competitors their cue to prepare. Kaminari focused, the familiar crackle of electricity dancing across his body as he activated his high-speed movement. The golden arcs of lightning began to swirl around him, charging his muscles for a burst of speed. Next to him, Todoroki's calm gaze didn't waver. A thin layer of frost began to form on the ground beneath his feet, signaling the activation of his ice-based quirk. Ready, go! KSSH, crack! In an instant, Kaminari and Todoroki launched forward, moving almost in unison. Kaminari's body surged with electricity, propelling him forward in a golden blur, while Todoroki's ice coated the ground in front of him, creating a slick path for him to glide across effortlessly. Here we go. All the teachers, students, and onlookers fell silent as Kaminari and Todoroki stood ready. Despite not knowing each other well yet, everyone was focused on the outcome of this race, eager to see the results of this thrilling face-off. The distance was short, just 50 meters, so if they didn't pay attention, they might miss the critical moment when the winner crossed the line. This is even possible. Tetsu, who had been confident that Todoroki's ice-based quirk wouldn't provide a speed boost, was left in shock as he watched the race unfold. On the track, Todoroki was creating a path of ice beneath his feet, sliding across the frozen surface with impressive speed and stability. Even on such slick terrain, his balance remained perfect, a clear sign that he had mastered this skill through rigorous training. Of course, Kaminari wasn't oblivious to what was happening beside him. He was running at full speed, electricity coursing through his body, but the blue blur of Todoroki was right next to him. Kaminari couldn't look directly at him, but the corner of his eye and his senses told him that Todoroki wasn't falling behind at all. Shwa, crack. In a matter of seconds, barely the time for a second breath, both Kaminari and Todoroki had crossed the finish line. They finished almost side by side, each pushing their quirks to the limit in this close race. Interestingly, while Kaminari's path was clean and clear, Todoroki left a long trail of ice, glittering under the morning sun. Who won? The spectators, unable to tell who had reached the line first, immediately turned their attention to the speedometer, eager to know the results. 3.03 seconds. 3.09 seconds. The numbers were announced, but they didn't indicate who achieved which time, leaving everyone still uncertain about the outcome. Wait, that's crazy fast, Mina Ashido exclaimed, her eyes wide in disbelief. But while most were impressed by the sheer speed, Ida Tenya, who had completed the race earlier, was left feeling a bit conflicted. Their speed is on par with my third gear, he muttered to himself. Though his quirk had higher speed potential, given enough distance, the fact that Kaminari and Todoroki had developed their quirks to this level, especially when their abilities weren't naturally tied to speed, left Ida deep in thought. Kaminari won. Ashido Mina shouted again, impatient to know the final answer. Who got the 3.03? Someone else added, voicing the question on everyone's minds. Even Aizawa hesitated. Despite being their teacher, he hadn't been able to keep track of the race well enough. He might have powerful quirks, but they didn't exactly include high-speed perception, and his eyes had dried out after straining to watch the race so intently. Kaminari got 3.03, Aizawa finally announced, holding up a small display linked to the speedometer. Yes, Kaminari won. Kaminari's quirk might be electric-based, but who knew he was this fast? That was so cool to watch. Tetsu, in particular, was beaming with pride. Haha, I knew Kaminari would win, he declared with a wide grin. Strongest recommendation student or not, Kaminari is the best first-year student here, he added, sneaking a glance at Todoroki, who was quietly making his way back to the group. However, while everyone was celebrating Kaminari's victory, Kaminari himself hadn't returned to the group yet. Instead, he had walked over to the icy trail left behind by Todoroki. He crouched down, placing his hand on the cold surface, and his palm immediately sparked with golden electricity. Crackle! The currents from his hand danced across the ice, but something strange happened. They couldn't spread very far. The electricity dissipated almost immediately after touching the ice. Kaminari frowned, deep in thought. No conductivity. Is it because this ice was created by his quirk? The reason wasn't hard to guess. In theory, pure water and ice don't conduct electricity. It's only when impurities are present that they become conductive. The ice Todoroki created was likely close to pure, uncontaminated by any natural elements, which explained why Kaminari's electricity wasn't spreading through it. This means Todoroki's ice has to be controlled through physical contact, Kaminari deduced. He's powerful, but it's not like the freezing abilities of those in the world I know, where they can freeze entire areas just by releasing cold air. His mind wandered for a moment, comparing Todoroki's abilities to that of a certain ice-based admiral from another world. But before he could get too lost in thought, Aizawa's voice snapped him back to the present. "What are you doing over there? We're moving on to the second event." Yes, Sensei." Kaminari quickly rejoined the group. The second event was the grip strength test. Each student was handed an electronic gripper to measure the force they could exert. Kaminari, naturally curious, inspected his device before activating his electric quirk to briefly stimulate the muscles in his right arm. With his grip fully enhanced, he squeezed the handle hard, waiting for the result. Kaminari blinked at the screen, which had displayed nothing but 4 question marks. He was confused. What was this supposed to mean? Did he break it? As the others around him began calling out their results, Kaminari remained silent, his mind processing what had just happened. "Whoa, 540 kilograms. Are you an octopus or something?" Ciro Hanta exclaimed, amazed at one of his classmates' results. "Octopus? That's kind of kinky," Mineta muttered, his thoughts clearly going somewhere inappropriate. Kaminari, still holding the malfunctioning gripper, looked over at Tetsu, who had just walked over to him. His friend, unaware of what had happened, asked, "Kaminari, what's your grip strength?" "Mine's 610. Before Kaminari could respond, Tetsu glanced at the screen in Kaminari's hand, his eyes widening at the display of question marks. "Holy crap," Tetsu shouted, his voice carrying across the group. "Kaminari's grip strength is unknown? Does that mean it's infinite?" The entire class fell silent at this, their heads turning in unison to stare at Kaminari. Aizawa, who had been watching from the side, raised a hand to his face, looking utterly done with the situation. The gripper short-circuited, he deadpanned, his usual calm demeanor slightly shaken by the absurdity of the situation. Kaminari stood there awkwardly, scratching his head. "Well, that's embarrassing," he muttered, trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The third event was the standing long jump. Kaminari channeled his electric current into his legs, and with a powerful burst, he jumped 10.8 meters. It was a respectable result, but compared to others, such as Azui Tsuyu, who excelled in jumping, Aoyama Yuga, who propelled himself with his naval laser, and Uraraka Ochiko, who made herself weightless and floated across, Kaminari found himself outshined in this event. Interestingly, Todoroki Shoto, who had shown impressive control over his ice powers earlier, performed rather ordinarily in this task. He didn't stand out at all, behaving almost like a regular person. Another surprise was Midoriya Izuku. Midoriya was a complete enigma to Kaminari. Despite watching him closely, Kaminari still couldn't figure out what kind of quirk the boy had. So far, Midoriya had shown nothing remarkable. How did he even pass the entrance exam? Kaminari wondered as he glanced at Midoriya. For some reason, he couldn't shake an odd feeling about the boy. There was something about him that made Kaminari curious, though he couldn't quite place what it was. Then there was the invisible girl, Toru Hagakure. Kaminari was curious about her too, though not just because of her quirk. He wondered how she'd look if she were visible, but he dismissed the thought quickly. Once he mastered electromagnetic fields, invisibility wouldn't matter. The fourth event was the repeated horizontal jump. Kaminari paid special attention to Minoru Mineta during this event. The boy's grape-like quirks were intriguing, if not a bit ridiculous. However, Kaminari couldn't help but wonder how strong those grapes really were. Could they be destroyed physically? Would his electricity have any effect on them? Kaminari concluded that Mineta's quirk would be highly effective in certain situations. If his sticky grapes couldn't be destroyed easily, it was actually a pretty strong ability. But Kaminari also noticed a problem. Mineta had to throw the grapes manually or place them on the ground, which meant they had a low hit rate unless there was some strategy behind their use. Kaminari chuckled inwardly. Mineta's quirk required tactical brilliance to maximize its potential. But judging by the boy's constant perverted remarks, it was hard to tell if he had the intelligence to back it up. The fifth event was the pitching test. When Kaminari saw Uraraka Ochiko throw the ball infinitely far thanks to her zero-gravity quirk, he immediately thought, this girl's going to be the next golden lion. He wondered if Uraraka could eventually manipulate objects she made weightless, much like how the golden lion Shiki could control floating rocks. What if she could lift entire chunks of the earth and throw them like weapons? The thought excited him, though he knew she probably wasn't there yet. It was merely speculation about the future potential of her quirk. as Kaminari's turn had already passed. The next person called up was Bakugo Katsuki. Aizawa's voice cut through the air. "Bakugo Katsuki, you're next." Finally, Bakugo growled, stepping up with barely contained excitement. He had been stewing with frustration ever since Kaminari and Todoroki had taken the spotlight. He was determined to prove he was the best. Bakugo's self-esteem bordered on arrogance, and watching others receive more attention than him drove him crazy. He couldn't stand it. Why were those two getting all the praise? Didn't everyone know he was the strongest? Boom! With an earth-shattering explosion, Bakugo launched the ball into the air, his palms propelling it with a fiery blast. The ball shot through the sky like a missile, trailing fire and smoke behind it. "Die!" Bakugo shouted, as if trying to blow up the very heavens. Watching this, Kaminari leaned over to Tetsu and muttered with a grin, "Well, when it comes to roughness, even you can't beat him." TCH. Tetsu clicked his tongue in annoyance. He had already formed a strong dislike for Bakugo. After witnessing Bakugo's brash attitude and rude behavior, especially toward Midoriya, Tetsu concluded that Bakugo was little more than a thug, a bully. He saw Bakugo's constant explosions as a reflection of his unstable personality. Tetsu couldn't stand people like that. He respected discipline and honor, traits Bakugo seemed to lack entirely. 705.2 meters, Aizawa announced after glancing at the rangefinder. His voice remained calm despite the impressive result. "That's your current limit. Remember it, and work to surpass it." Whoa! Over 700 meters. That's insane. The other students were astonished by Bakugo's performance. Kaminari had thrown the ball over 400 meters earlier, which had already seemed incredible. But Bakugo had just shattered that by nearly 300 meters. "Well, I guess his explosive power is a lot better than mine," Kaminari thought to himself, feeling no shame in the comparison. He had been working on controlling his quirk and improving his physical abilities for years. For Bakugo to reach such heights at his age was impressive. But Kaminari didn't feel the need to compete with a 15-year-old over something so trivial. However, Bakugo seemed to feel differently. As he walked back, he shot Kaminari a defiant glare, as if daring him to challenge his dominance. Kaminari responded with a calm look, making it clear he wasn't fazed. Instead, he turned his attention to the next person. And finally, "Izuku Midoriya," Aizawa announced, his voice softer this time, as if he knew what was about to unfold. Ida and Uraraka, both of whom had seen Midoriya in action during the entrance exam, looked hopeful. But others, including Kaminari, Tetsu, and the rest of the class, were simply curious. Midoriya hadn't shown anything extraordinary so far, so how had he passed the hero course exam? Bakugo, however, was filled with disdain. He still believed Midoriya was quirkless and had no place here. "He's just a quirkless loser," Bakugo spat out, confident that Midoriya would fail. "What did you say?" Ida, startled by Bakugo's claim, turned to him in confusion. "Quirkless? How could he be quirkless after what he did in the entrance exam? What feat?" Kaminari perked up, his curiosity growing. He had heard nothing about any major accomplishment by Midoriya during the exam. How had someone who seemed so ordinary made it this far? Midoriya, gripping the ball nervously, threw it. But nothing remarkable happened. 46 meters, Aizawa said, almost in disbelief. The result was underwhelming, to say the least. 46 meters? Kaminari couldn't believe his eyes. How had Midoriya passed the entrance exam with such a weak performance? Had he somehow cheated? Or did he get in through some kind of backdoor? Just then, Aizawa stepped forward, pulling down the white bandage around his neck. "I erased your quirk," he said, his voice low and stern. Kaminari's eyes widened. Erased his quirk? The implications of Aizawa's words hit Kaminari like a ton of bricks. The ability to eliminate someone's quirk entirely? Kaminari immediately thought of Toma Kamiju, a figure from another world with the power to nullify supernatural abilities. But Aizawa was clearly even more powerful than Toma. He could neutralize quirks from a distance, without needing to make physical contact. Is this guy even human? Kaminari's mind raced, but outwardly he remained composed, merely showing a hint of surprise. After all, someone aiming to be a superstar needed to maintain their cool, right? Eliminating quirks. Midoriya murmured to himself. As his eyes flicked to the yellow goggles hanging around Aizawa's neck, a sudden realization dawned on him. He remembered something from his endless research on professional heroes. Staring at class teacher Aizawa in shock, he shouted, "Those goggles. I know who you are. You can erase other people's quirks by looking at them. You're the Erasure hero, Eraserhead." The moment Midoriya revealed Aizawa's true identity, murmurs rippled through the group. The students began to talk excitedly about their teacher, but Kaminari wasn't part of the chatter. Instead, he absorbed the information Midoriya had just shared, his mind racing. A quirk that erases other quirks just by looking at someone? That's way more powerful than Kamijutoma or even Blackbeard. They both need to physically touch their targets, but Aizawa can do it from a distance. Kaminari's thoughts continued to swirl. But there must be a limit. No quirk is truly flawless. If I ever have to face Aizawa, I need to figure out how to deal with his ability. His curiosity deepened as he observed Aizawa. The teacher's control over his bandages was also fascinating. What's the deal with that? Is it another quirk, or just some insane technique? Or maybe there's some kind of telekinesis involved. The more Kaminari analyzed Aizawa, the more intrigued he became. There was so much to learn, and he knew mastering these lessons would be key to his future success. At that moment, Aizawa suddenly lashed out with his bandages, wrapping them tightly around Midoriya as if to make a point. Whatever he said, it had a visible effect on Midoriya, whose face turned pale. But instead of crumbling, Midoriya's expression grew determined, his resolve hardening. He's not giving up. Kaminari watched closely as Midoriya returned to the pitching circle. Something had shifted. The boy's eyes were lit with a fierce intensity that hadn't been there before. Midoriya prepared to throw again, and Kaminari's heartbeat quickened. He had a strange feeling about what was coming next. Something inside Midoriya had ignited, and Kaminari couldn't tear his eyes away. Then he saw it. Midoriya's finger began to glow, the light intensifying with each passing second. No way. His finger is glowing. Suddenly, Midoriya roared. Smasha! With that cry, the white ball in his hand blasted forward, tearing through the air with a deafening boom, leaving a trail of white airwaves in its wake. The sheer power of the throw seemed to break the sound barrier. Boom! The air pressure from the throw caused an explosive sound that sent shockwaves across the field. Kaminari and the others shielded their ears from the noise. But that wasn't all. The ground itself rippled from the force, sand and dust kicking up in wild spirals around Midoriya. Kaminari could only stare in disbelief. What just happened? He looked up at the ball, now a distant dot in the sky. That power, it might even rival my railgun. No, the range alone puts it way ahead. He wasn't the only one floored by the display. All eyes were on Midoriya now, including Bakugo's. The explosion-loving boy was speechless, his usual sneer replaced by wide-eyed shock. This entire time, he had believed Midoriya was quirkless. Now, that belief was crumbling before his eyes. For the first time in a long while, Kaminari felt like he was a background character, watching someone else take center stage. He glanced at Midoriya with a complicated mix of emotions, the gears in his head turning. 705.3 meters. Aizawa announced after checking the rangefinder. But before anyone could react, Midoriya called out, "Sensei!" Midoriya's voice cracked with emotion. His entire body was trembling, but his expression remained resolute. I can still move." Those words echoed in the silent field, carrying a weight far heavier than anyone expected. Midoriya's tone, filled with pain and determination, struck something deep within Aizawa and, unbeknownst to the students, All Might, who was secretly observing from a distance. Kaminari, still trying to process everything, analyzed what he had just seen. So, his quirk releases an explosive burst of power in a single moment. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. If that's the case, I can handle it. As long as I avoid that one powerful hit, he shouldn't be much of a threat. It was an instinctive reaction, one that Kaminari couldn't help. Ever since he became fascinated with manga and quirks, he had made a habit of analyzing different abilities and figuring out how he would deal with them in combat. It had become a game for him, a game he found endlessly fascinating. The rest of the test went by quickly. Midoriya, having pushed his quirk to its limit, didn't do anything noteworthy after that. It was as if his earlier display had drained him of all his power. Kaminari's suspicions were confirmed. Midoriya's quirk was probably an explosive, one-use ability, or perhaps it required time to charge up. As the test concluded, Kaminari felt a sense of accomplishment. He had gained valuable insight into the abilities of his classmates, and more importantly, he now knew his own limitations. Quirks like Shoto Todoroki's, ice abilities, and Yaoyorozu Momo's creation power intrigued him the most. Man, everyone here is so impressive, Kaminari thought with a grin. But the smile didn't last long before he reminded himself, my quirk isn't bad either. In any world, whether it's here or the Marvel Universe, lightning abilities are always top tier. With the test over, Aizawa stood in front of them. The assessment is finished. You'll be given a lesson plan. Study it carefully. I don't want any of you being late or missing a class. He turned on his heel, clearly intending to leave, but paused. And remember, no matter how good you think you are, there's always room for improvement. The students glanced at each other, then slowly began walking back to class in pairs or small groups. I wonder what the next class will be, Tetsu mused, hands shoved into his pockets. He was excited about the prospect of using his quirk again in the future. He also shot a glance at Midoriya, who was limping toward the infirmary. That kid is seriously weird. He has a crazy strong quirk, but he acts all weak and scared around that Bakugo guy. His voice wasn't particularly loud, but it carried in the quiet space, enough for Bakugo to hear. Surprisingly, Bakugo, who had been fuming just moments earlier, didn't react. Instead, he stared at Midoriya's back, his expression dark and unreadable. You lied to me, Deku, Bakugo muttered under his breath, his hands sparking ominously. Kaminari glanced at Bakugo, then leaned closer to Tetsu. Maybe he's not scared of him at all. Maybe he's just worried about accidentally hurting someone else with his power. It's a reasonable assumption, don't you think? He wasn't trying to provoke Bakugo, just voicing his thoughts out loud. Kaminari was someone who always spoke his mind, even if it ruffled a few feathers. He didn't believe in holding back when it came to voicing his opinions, especially when they made sense. But the moment those words left his mouth, Bakugo froze in place. The air around him crackled as tiny explosions popped from his palms. What did you just say? Bakugo's voice was low, his gaze snapping toward Kaminari. His fiery temper was flaring once more. Bakugo had always seen Midoriya as a weakling, a little tagalong who envied him from the sidelines. That was the natural order, especially after discovering that Midoriya was quirkless. Bakugo's superiority complex deepened, and he believed that Midoriya's only role in life was to look up to him. But today had shattered that illusion. Midoriya, the same kid Bakugo had mocked for being quirkless, had been accepted into UA alongside him. And worse, Midoriya had thrown a ball with enough power to rival his own. That one throw was like a slap in the face, as if reality itself was mocking Bakugo's arrogance. His anger was palpable. Midoriya had deceived him for years. Bakugo felt humiliated, as though all those times he'd lorded his strength over Midoriya had been part of some elaborate joke. What if Midoriya had been pretending all along? What if all the times Bakugo had belittled him, Midoriya had just been holding back, afraid of hurting him? And then, to make it worse, Kaminari had said it out loud. Midoriya wasn't afraid of you. He was afraid of hurting you. Those words were like gasoline poured on a raging fire. Bakugo's vision blurred with fury, his mind filled with violent thoughts. His hands trembled as his palms began to secrete the explosive sweat he was known for. What did you just say? Bakugo's voice was low, strained with rage. Kaminari turned, meeting Bakugo's intense glare without a hint of fear. You heard me, he said coolly, showing no intention of backing down. Bakugo's bloodshot eyes narrowed. To him, Kaminari's calm response was infuriating, like he wasn't worth the effort. Bakugo had never encountered someone who talked to him like this. Not since he was a kid. His fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. You're dead, Bakugo growled, unable to hold himself back any longer. He swung a punch at Kaminari's face. Kaminari! Jiro shouted in alarm, seeing the punch coming. But before Bakugo's fist could land, a loud thud echoed across the hallway. Tetsu had stepped in, catching Bakugo's punch in midair with his own iron-hard hand. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he stared down Bakugo. "Enough of that, Bakugo," Tetsu said, his voice steady but filled with tension. His grip on Bakugo's fist tightened, and Bakugo, for the first time, felt real resistance. Without using his quirk, Bakugo wasn't strong enough to overpower Tetsu's steel-like grip. Bakugo's eyes flickered with frustration. "You're not giving in to me, huh?" His voice was laced with venom as he tried to pull his hand back, but Tetsu wasn't letting go. If anything, his grip only tightened further. Tetsu stared into Bakugo's eyes with a coldness that matched the steel of his quirk. "Not everyone is going to roll over for you, Bakugo. Some of us don't care who you are or what you can do." Bakugo's hand began to heat up, his sweat turning volatile. Small explosions popped in his palm, signaling his growing anger. "Let go before I make you," Bakugo spat. Before things could escalate further, Ito appeared, rushing over to the scene. He grabbed both Bakugo and Tetsu by the shoulders, his stern voice cutting through the tension. "Stop this at once. We're all classmates now. Fighting won't solve anything." Despite Ita's intervention, Bakugo and Tetsu stayed locked in their standoff for a moment longer, their muscles tense, before finally relenting. Tetsu released Bakugo's hand, and the explosive boy took a step back, seething. Tetsu, let's go." Kaminari gave a slight nod to Tetsu, then motioned for him and Jiro to follow. They walked away, leaving Bakugo to glare at their retreating figures, his fists still clenched tightly at his sides. "I'll make them pay for this," Bakugo seethed inwardly, his mind racing with thoughts of revenge. He had never been so humiliated in his life, and the feeling gnawed at him, pushing him closer to the edge. Back in the classroom, Kaminari paid no further attention to Bakugo. He sat down and glanced at the schedule on his desk, skimming through the list of upcoming classes. He noticed that while other subjects had only 6 classes, the hero course had 7, 4 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, with a break for lunch. Saturdays were especially rough for hero students, with classes extending until the 6th period, unlike other departments that got out after the 4th. Hero training really is no joke, Kaminari thought with a sigh. He was particularly looking forward to the science classes, hoping he could dive deeper into electromagnetism, which would help him develop his quirk further. But after his first science class, Kaminari felt a pang of disappointment. The material covered was too basic, nothing close to what he had hoped to learn about electromagnetism. After class, he approached the science teacher, a bulky hero with a robotic arm known as Engineering Robot. "Sensei," Kaminari started, "when will we start learning about electromagnetism in depth?" "Electromagnetism?" Engineering Robot scratched his head awkwardly. "That's usually covered in more detail starting in your 2nd year." Kaminari frowned. "2nd year? But I really want to start learning now." The teacher smiled apologetically. "I'd love to help, but I don't have time for tutoring right now. Between teaching and maintaining the school's infrastructure, I've got my hands full." "Ah, I understand. Thank you anyway," Kaminari replied, trying not to let his disappointment show. As the teacher left the room, he sighed and turned to go back to his desk. But just as he was about to sit down, he heard a voice behind him. "You're interested in learning about electromagnetism?" Yaoyorozu Momo's voice was gentle, but her tone carried a hint of curiosity. Kaminari turned, surprised. "Do you know anything about it?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Momo smiled confidently. "Yes, I've studied it quite a bit. While my specialty is in molecular structures and chemistry, I've also delved into electrostatics, magnetic fields, and the basics of changing electromagnetic fields." She spoke effortlessly, rattling off terms that went over the heads of most of their classmates. Kaminari, however, was impressed. "You really know your stuff, huh?" Momo shrugged modestly. "I try to keep myself well-rounded. I'd be happy to teach you what I know." Kaminari hesitated, surprised by her offer. "You'd really do that?" "Of course." Momo's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "I love helping others learn. Why don't you come over to my house after school today? We can go over some electromagnetics for a couple of hours. I'm sure you'll pick it up quickly." Kaminari grinned. "Sounds good to me." He didn't notice the slight frown that crossed Jiro's face as she watched the exchange. Her eyes flicked from Momo to Kaminari, a thoughtful expression settling over her features. She said nothing, though, simply turning her attention back to the class schedule in front of her. At 4:10 p.m., Class A was dismissed, marking the official end of Kaminari and his classmates' first day at UA High School. However, for some, school ending didn't mean the day was over. Kaminari and others still had plenty to do. Kaminari made a quick call home to explain why he'd be coming back later than usual. Afterward, he waved goodbye to Tetsu and Jiro, who seemed a little out of sorts, at the gates of the hero protective wall. "All right, lead the way," Kaminari said, turning to Yaoyorozu Momo, who was practically buzzing with excitement. She was thrilled this was her first opportunity to officially teach someone. For as long as she could remember, Yaoyorozu had been learning on her own, accumulating knowledge far beyond that of her peers. But today, she wasn't just studying. She was going to impart what she knew. The idea of being a mentor filled her with enthusiasm. "Lead the way," Momo repeated, momentarily puzzled by Kaminari's words, before understanding dawned. She pointed to a sleek black limousine rolling toward them and smiled. "Our ride is here." Okay," Kaminari said with a casual shrug. It was just a limo, no big deal. Though in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but compare it to the car at his own home, which, while nice, was nowhere near this level of luxury. 40 minutes later, they arrived at a sprawling mansion in Aichi Prefecture. Kaminari stepped out of the car and took in his surroundings, a bit speechless. "Seriously? Is this for real?" he muttered under his breath as he stared at the enormous mansion before him. Although he'd figured that Yaoyorozu Momo came from a wealthy family, this was on another level entirely. To be fair, anyone would be floored by such grandeur. After all, mansions like this only existed in movies and TV dramas, at least for most people. "Come on, let's go inside," Momo called, breaking his daze. "I've asked the butler to prepare everything." Kaminari took a deep breath and told himself to stay calm. "I'm just here to learn about electromagnetism," he reminded himself. "Focus on that." Even so, he made a mental note to research the Yaoyorozu family later. He couldn't believe that a family this wealthy didn't have some kind of public profile. While Kaminari was in the mansion, sitting in an overly spacious hall, sipping top-quality black tea, and absorbing Momo's explanations about electromagnetism, his friend Tetsu was pouring his energy into another endeavor, training at the judo hall. Boom! For the umpteenth time, Tetsu hit the wooden floor with a heavy thud. This time, the fall left him more dazed than usual. He lay there for a moment, staring up at the glaring lights on the ceiling, his chest heaving. Not far away stood Goro Daimon, his judo instructor, a massive man, well over 2 meters tall, clad in a white judo uniform. He looked down at Tetsu with calm eyes and asked, "Are you giving up already?" "No, not yet," Tetsu grumbled, pushing himself up with a groan. He looked at his teacher with frustration. "But when are you actually going to teach me some judo? All I do is get thrown around." Ever since he started training here, all he'd done was get tossed across the mat. It didn't matter if he was facing fellow students or Daimon himself. Tetsu's role was always the same. Where were the throws, the moves, the techniques he was supposed to be learning? "You can't learn to throw until you understand why you're being thrown," Daimon said, his tone still calm, but with an edge of sternness. "Do you feel the movements of the person throwing you? Do you think about how to minimize the impact when you hit the ground? Have you thought about countering their movements?" Tetsu lowered his head, embarrassed. He hadn't considered any of that. "Up until now, you've just been reacting without thinking," Daimon continued. "Do you think fighting is just about learning a set of moves like it's some video game? Do you believe that memorizing a few techniques is all you need to win a fight?" Tetsu's silence deepened. Good fighting is about constant thinking. You need to feel your opponent's movements and analyze your own in response. "That's what you should be focusing on right now," Daimon said, crossing his arms. "Once you understand the fundamentals of being thrown, then we can move on to the next stage. Mastery of throwing someone is a lifelong journey." The words ignited something inside Tetsu. His frustration melted away, replaced by determination. His eyes gleamed with renewed energy. "Got it, sensei. Let's go again. Tetsu shouted, charging forward once more, but this time his eyes were sharper, more focused. He was watching Daimon's every movement, trying to predict the next throw. In his heart, Tetsu roared. Kaminari wants to be the strongest lightning-type hero? Then I'll be the strongest hardcore hero. Though he and Kaminari hadn't known each other for long, Tetsu could already feel how impressive Kaminari was. The sense of urgency to improve weighed on him. He couldn't let the gap between them grow too large. He wouldn't allow it. If a powerful villain appeared in the future, he wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder with Kaminari, ready to fight. He didn't want to be the one standing in the background, helpless. To him, that wasn't a true partnership. He had to become stronger. Here I come. Tetsu roared inwardly, and the sound of bodies hitting the mat filled the dojo once again. But this time, there was a sense of struggle Tetsu was beginning to resist. Back in Shizuoka Prefecture, Jiro Kyoko walked home in silence, her black school bag slung over her shoulder. Unlike her usual routine, she hadn't put on her headphones to block out the noise of the world. Instead, she seemed lost in thought. Her phone buzzed inside her bag, playing Only My Railgun as her ringtone. She unzipped her bag and pulled out the phone, answering the call without checking the screen. "Hey, Kazama," she said quietly, recognizing the caller's voice instantly. "How's it going at UA?" came the gentle voice of a young man on the other end. Jiro paused, glancing around at the street she was walking down. It was quiet, peaceful, but something about today had left her feeling unsettled. "It's fine," she replied, her voice more guarded than usual. "Just fine." Kazama's tone was soft but knowing. He could tell when something was off. "You don't sound like yourself, Kyoka." Jiro hesitated, her thumb tracing the edge of her phone case absent-mindedly. She didn't feel like explaining everything, but at the same time, keeping it to herself was making her feel even more out of sorts. She sighed quietly, deciding to brush off her unease with a half-truth.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.